Let me ask you a question, John. If I told you right now to walk up to any one of these books, now not physically, but mentally, and I want you to flip it open to any page, to look at that page and to go back and forth and stop at any word, can you see this happening? Close your eyes and in your mind's eye, envision that occurring. I want to show them at home because people will say later that I changed what I wrote somehow.
All right.
Open your eyes. What was that word?
Hell, dude. This is not staged. This is crazy. I'm blown away. All right, welcome back to Storytime with MrBallen. This was such a hit on the last episode with Tom Segura that we decided we would do more. And today's guest, I got to be honest, they're going to blow your mind. Seriously, I went into this experience sort of skeptical. I mean, the things this person does are sort of impossible. I mean, he goes in front of these audiences, which include huge celebrities and professional sports teams, and effectively reads their minds. He certainly blows their minds. And he does it under so much pressure, and he nails it every time. And so we asked him on the show. He's got some amazing stories, and he also truly I have something written on my hand right now that has to do with one of the tricks that he pulled on me, and it's just, I can't believe how this episode went. So really stick around. He's an amazing guy and just a master of his craft. He's going to blow your mind. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode.
I'm Oz the Mentalist. I'm here on Storytime with MrBallen. I already know what you're thinking. Stick around.
All right, Oz the Mentalist Perlman.
Yeah.
So you are the world's greatest mentalist. I mean, lately I've seen you pop up all over the place. You were just on Joe Rogan and his reaction to when he guesses his
Pissed off. Joe, you have not seen him that angry in a while. You know, he goes down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories and he was like, did you hack me? Have you literally gotten into my life? How did you get my PIN code?
I liked how you were like, hey, let's just be spontaneous. You're like, look, I'm gonna try to guess your ATM PIN code. And you can just see it on Joe. He's like, okay, all right, let's see. And you guessed the first number at some point. You're like, just tell me, is it 1? I think it was 1.
Yep.
And he's like, all right. But then as soon as you began doing it, you could just see his whole mentality, everything shifted. And you can just see as the audience, if this is staged, it's the best staging I've ever seen, because his reaction was not pleasure. It was like, stop.
How'd I do, Joe? Is that your ATM PIN code?
Yeah. That's weird. I'm skeptical because I've got that PIN code in the mail. You know?
People loved seeing it because with Joe, he is the ultimate debunker.
Yeah.
Are we in agreement? Like, no one's going on Joe Rogan and telling Joe what to do.
No.
On the biggest platform in the world, that he is the boss, and he didn't know what was going to happen. And I think that's what captivated the public. Is if he would have been amazed, that's one thing, but he was angry and a little scared.
So tell me, like, what is a mentalist?
Right.
Because I've looked it up.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really accomplish the task here. I want to hear from you. And secondarily, how does one know they have the skill to be a mentalist?
So a mentalist is a form of magic, right?
Okay.
This is not in the world of psychics and supernatural. That's not what I pretend to do. I completely make sure that I go out of my way to ensure people understand I'm not claiming to be a psychic. I'm not supernatural. Instead, I have a series of skills that I've developed, kind of like an arsenal of tools over decades of learning how people think, and it's grounded in magic. So everyone knows what a magician is, right? You could go to an 8-year-old, they've started to see magic tricks. And when we watch magic, we understand that we're being fooled with our eyes. Somehow this person knows how to do things quickly or to distract me so they do something somewhere else, right? When you cut the woman in half, spoiler alert, guys, I'm not trying to ruin Christmas. There's no Santa Claus. You're not really cutting the woman in half. Somehow you're deceiving me with an illusion. That's the name of the word. That's really what it's called. So magic is all about misdirection and fooling the eyes. This is a specialized subset within magic where it's magic of the mind. Very different. I'm not fooling your eyes because there's no fast hands. There's almost no props. I can show up. I had a show last night in Toronto. Came right here from the airport where I did a show. It was a smaller group, about 400 people. And I show up with nothing. I have a pad of paper and a marker, which if I don't have with me, they can grab for me.
Yeah.
The show isn't props. I'm the show. And so what I've learned to do is know how people think. And by knowing effectively how people think, I'll know what they think. And I'll present that in a very entertaining, fooling, and hopefully memorable manner. So mentalism is psychology, misdirection, deception, influence. It's all these different skills baked into one cake.
And is this something that you always knew you possessed? Some skills that ultimately crystallized and became you being the world's greatest mentalist.
Right. Thank you.
Did you have moments in your life before this became a thing where you're like, I have these innate skills that I
Sure.
could refine, but you knew you had them? Or is this something that people could be taught?
Absolutely, people can be taught. So this
Really?
is a learnable skill, but I would liken it to musical talent, which is innate in a sense, which is you could probably learn to play the piano and do a certain number of songs. Like my 9-year-old plays the piano. If I continued practicing every day for a year, I'd probably get better. But what if I practiced for a decade? Would I ever be good enough to play at Carnegie Hall in New York City? I don't think I would. I think that it's not in me, that innate, God-given gift, whatever you want to call it. You can develop the skills, but will you get to a certain level, there might be a ceiling.
Sure.
So that's the best way to describe it. I have a gift for it, and I've also been very, very persistent, and never underestimate the power of persistence, because mentalism has a steep learning curve, and most people don't have thick enough skin to get through the times when you suck. So magic can be practiced over and over and over in a mirror, and you can improve because it's move-based. It's kind of like playing golf. If you practice your swing, hopefully by the millionth swing, you're gonna be great. You might not be Rory McIlroy or Tiger Woods. With this, the only way that I can get better is by doing it for an audience. Do you see what I mean? You can't practice guessing what people are gonna think without people. And the first few 100 times you do it, you're gonna eat, pardon my French, you're gonna eat shit. Like you're not gonna be good. There's very few mentalists that started good. And so what tends to happen is you perform, you suck, you go, oh my God, that was painful. I don't wanna do that again. I don't wanna experience that suffering. So I did much more magic for years. And then I started dipping my toes in the water of mentalism and then doing a little more and then doing a little more. And then I was on a show, if we like rewind my career, there was a moment where it was like a fork in the road where I was on America's Got Talent.
Of course.
Changed my life. And I rebranded myself as, instead of like, quote unquote, O's the magician, I became O's the mentalist. That's how I literally monikered it, because now I differentiated myself from others and decided I'm not doing magic anymore. That was like the crutch. I just started doing just mentalism.
That's interesting. I think one of the things that I've noticed about you and your rise that's currently up and to the right, you really are killing it right now, is in a way, I feel like I can relate a little bit to the pressure that you put on yourself. And I'll give you some context. So I know that you're into distance running, in addition to like serious distance running. This dude's done like 153 miles.
It's true.
Regularly runs marathons on a whim. It is a physical feat, no doubt. But it is a mental feat more than anything else.
Agreed. It's more mental than physical. Anybody who tells me, oh, I can't do this, I'm like, that you already set yourself up. I can't. You've already created an obstacle in your mind. It's the wrong viewpoint, and your mind translates into your body. So you telling yourself that creates that. I think, the mind controls the body. I've seen people that are 20, 30 years older than me finish a race that I didn't finish. Objectively, I'm fitter than they are, I'm younger than they are, I'm stronger than they are. Why did they finish when I didn't? Because my mind crumbled.
Yeah.
And you know it. I mean, buds, how many people rang that bell?
A lot.
That were probably tough SOBs, but they didn't have it mentally.
It's true. And in fact, you had said that when you first tried the Spartathlon, 'cause you did it twice, right?
I did it twice.
So the Spartathlon's 153 miles,
Yep,
right?
153 miles, 36-hour cutoff. So it's very important. There's races that are longer. Right now, there's a heyday of people running 200-mile races, all this crazy stuff. But this, you can't slow down and walk very much. Like in these other races, they're glorified hikes. No offense to all these people who do 200s. They do it for 4 or 5 days.
Right.
Most of the people are, it's slow. This is running nonstop for a day and a half. You start on a Saturday morning, I'm running till Sunday evening.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And so like what people need to understand about running really long distances, I've done a couple marathons. And a marathon is 26.2 miles.
Which is very respectable.
Totally. It's respectable.
Don't you talk down on yourself.
But when you hit about mile 20, people say that's sort of like the halfway point, even though it's not. 26.2, the halfway is 13.
Right.
But at about 20 miles is when your body sort of reaches that point where it's like, okay, we've lost all the glucose stores. We're sort of burning on muscle at this point. It's like you're falling apart. And I remember when I ran a marathon and I hit mile 20, it was like I can barely move and I have 6 miles to go.
Right.
So for anyone that's even thinking, oh, 153 miles, yeah, you just suck it up and go. That's not how that works. This is like a mental test of magnitudes you may not understand. But you had said if the first time you did the Spartathlon, you did not finish.
Didn't finish.
And you knew as you're running along, you're like, I'm not going to finish this.
Right.
And you're writing the story in your head that you're like, how am I going to spin this to the people that, they expected me to finish and I didn't.
Yes.
But you went back and you ultimately did it again and you finished it. That's so highly unusual. One, that you went after it in the first place, but two, that you went back and did the race. I think that says a lot about not only your mental toughness, but why you have these innate skills, you've honed those skills to become the mentalist that you are, but you obviously have this ability to put yourself in these highly mentally stressful environments and perform not just well, but at your literal best.
Right.
And so like, dude, you go in front of an entire NFL football team. And these are also clips you got to check out if you haven't seen them, like the Bengals. You go
one of my favorites.
And like he'll tell the players, like the quarterback Joe Burrow, and he's like, I'm going to write down who you're going to throw it to. And I'm not going to show you. You're going to do it, throw it to anybody in the room. And then after you do it, I'm going to show you what I thought. And like the clip, you see that he's written down a name. And sure enough, he turns, he throws the football, and everyone's like, oh, he guessed it right. But then the next time you do it, you write down 2 names. And it's like, he's going to fake to this person and throw to this person. And you're holding it back. And sure enough, Joe, who clearly has no idea what you've written down.
Right.
Fake, throw, room goes wild.
Tanner.
Fakes to Jamar, throws to Tanner.
How do you put yourself in that position consistently and just stay calm enough to do those things when the outcome's binary? That's so stressful. How do you do it?
So I think your mindset, and this is where the ultra running and the mentalism go hand in hand, and I think each one has improved the other. Truly. There's physiological things involved, which being able to be calm under pressure, that calmness directly creates the success in the situation, which is when you start panicking, those chemicals that flood through your body can indicate to other people, the same way that animals can smell fear. They can literally smell fear. I think we still have that hardwired in us. We are still animals in a sense where we don't trust our instincts, but we can feel it. Like right now, if somebody walks in the room, even if you don't know that they're there, you have situational awareness where you can sense somebody walked in. How is that, right? It's not sonar. There's something in you that I don't know how we explain that's a sense that can indicate danger, which I'm sure you've had. You can sense on high alert and something floods you because that fight or flight. So in those situations where it's do or die, not literally, but if that screws up in that room, there's no safety net. This football team didn't walk in and get set up and say, hey guys, act excited for this random dude.
No.
Joe Burrow, the funny part about that clip was the day it dropped, the day before he signed the most lucrative contract in NFL history, $275 million with some obscene number that was guaranteed, like $184 million, fact check me. So the best comment, the comment that run up the most was go, dude, he clearly paid this guy to do it. And then my comment under to this guy was, bro, I wish I had enough money to pay Joe Burrow off to pretend to do this. And it got up like 10,000 times because it's so comical. It's like, how do you think?
Right.
The behind the scenes on that, by the way, is great because Joe is very shy. He's a great guy, but I had no time with him. And when you go to these football teams, there's a series of people that are intermediaries. I'm not talking to the players.
No.
There's the PR team, the communications team. These are organizations. And they say to you, that person doesn't want to be involved. And so I say to them, with all due respect, I'll see who wants to be involved. I say yes. But when I get in the room, my job is to convert no's into yeses, where some of the people that thought they wanted nothing to do with me, I'm going to win them over. And the Joe Burrow thing, yes, there was an amazing trick, but getting somebody who, when they sat down in their mind, said 100% no, I'm not getting involved, and then having them not only say yes to what I was going to do, buy in, but then have a monster reaction that's since been viewed hundreds of millions of times and helped change my life. That same thing, that set of skills on how to win people over, influence them, is applicable to everyone in every facet of your life. It works in business, if you're doing sales. It works in relationships, whether it's people you know closely and you want to create deeper bonds, or whether it's people you want to win over, whether it's like a romantic sense, friendship sense. It's how do you meet people and connect with them in a deeper way and get them not only to like you, build rapport, but both of those two things are to do what you want them to do. Not in a nefarious way, but think about
Right.
it. I'm a parent. I'm trying to win my kids over. I'm selling them all the time my ideas, which is please do your homework right now, even though you don't want to because there's better things to do. How do you convince them in an effective manner? And that is a form of mentalism, which is knowing how people think and using it to your advantage. That's what I'm doing all the time. And those are the skills you can apply. Going back to what you said with Joe Burrow and all these situations, I have used the running to calm myself and to not think of the finish line, which is when you're at 20 miles
Yep.
and you're miserable,
Yep.
it sounds like 6 miles is so little. It's just 6 miles, man. You've done a 10K before, but in the moment, every step hurts. I'm miserable. I'm puking. I feel terrible. I want to be done now. I want to be on a couch eating ice cream now. What the hell was I thinking doing this race? I am not a superhuman. Like literally, it's the same way that a friend of mine, David Goggins, will say,
Oh, man.
I don't want to be out there running in the rain, in the cold at 4:30 a.m. But the fact that I don't want to do it is why I'm doing it. Because that's where the real training hits. The moments where it becomes hard is where you learn who you really are. When I'm sitting here talking about running, it's easy. Oh yeah, it's fun. I want to get to the moments where I'm in the deepest, darkest place and I'm asking myself, questioning, why am I doing this? Don't want to do it, and I still persevere. That's where you become stronger. It's where you tear the muscle and grow it back stronger. And those skills have allowed me, when I'm in those pressured moments, and that ultras are like something I stand on, where I'm completely calm. And I'm
Interesting.
very aligned, and I'm not going to panic. So the people around me see how calm I am, and I can still keep them within my control.
What you're doing is so stress packed, almost on purpose.
Right.
You're going in front of this crowd that's like big professional athletes, like all these celebrities, and you're gonna like walk in and impress them and do something that's just unbelievable.
Right.
Is there thrill out of the fact that you know going into that you're gonna be calm and people will see that not only will you perform, but for you, this is what you do. Do you seek these moments out because that is empowering for you?
Man, if we got like into a therapy session of like Freudian, I keep taking big swings at things that I don't know if they're necessarily going to work.
Yeah.
But I think that the audience can sense the danger, the risk.
Yes.
That's what's exciting. And so you can feel the excitement through the camera. It's what captures you. Because I don't know, I can't explain it. It's the audience can know internally that this might have gone wrong and
yes.
it didn't. And that's why you get the big reactions.
So I've done a couple of live speaking engagements, just telling stories to crowds. And I remember I told my production team as we were getting ready to put it together, like, how do you want it to go? How much production value do you want? And I said, I was like, I need the first time I do speaking engagements to be basically just me and a microphone. I want it to be a pure experience because I need to prove to myself that like, I can deliver something that's really engaging without any props, without anything, just me.
Right.
And it was like the sense of, I almost hated myself for doing this because you're setting yourself up, right? I'm going to walk out in front of thousands of people, me and a microphone. I've never done this before.
Right.
It could go horribly wrong. But it's like, I almost felt like the only way to do it was like full send commitment, like commitment to the bit.
You have to.
And I'd go out on stage, and with that sense of commitment, I was able to easily do these shows.
Yeah.
And I think for you, what I see in all these clips of you just like blowing people away, honestly, more than the bit, it is this sense that you are completely committed. And even if it goes wrong, it's like somehow he's going to spin this.
Right.
He's got full command of the room.
People love when it goes wrong. So there's that level of why are those traffic jams where you're like, why was there such a traffic jam? The rubbernecking, right? The human instinct that's in our DNA of liking to gossip and liking to see what's going on with them. Oh, look at that car, holy crap, right? Everyone does it. We're all slowed down. We're on the freaking BQE, and what just happened? Why is, like I-78 is jammed up because one jerk was texting.
Yeah.
And we have to watch that. So that same approach is, again, hardwired in our DNA. So in my show, I'm very keenly aware of moments where I can create stress, confusion, or light chaos. And I can make it so that you forget the things I want you to forget. And then I put the camera on the things I want you to remember. And during the moment where you're recounting what happened, I'm telling the story that you're going to remember in your mind. People don't realize that memory is malleable. So we think of his memory as the same thing as this camera shooting me right now, that we could rewind, play back, and it's it's immutable. It never changes. It's on camera, right? It's not. People remember certain things, and they are typically related to emotion. So I'll give you a great example. Eyewitness testimony, which you know more than anyone, is inherently unreliable because when people's cortisol levels, adrenaline, they're in a moment where they just saw the shit go down, their body floods with these emotions and all of these things that they're not used to encountering. For most people, they're not into those situations that are high stress. And now suddenly a face, a color of hair, a height, all of that stuff that's captured in 1 or 2 seconds can be changed, especially if you're interrogated later and asked questions and the investigator uses leading language, right? So when you saw this guy who was like 6'2", 6'3", I see? Well, I kind of maybe, right? You can start to change what they have, right? Imagine you do a watercolor painting and it's not dry yet. I can start to change what you painted. I'm narrating the story that you will tell the next person about me. And I will get rid of the parts I don't want, just like an editor clips sections out. And I have it so your memory only remembers the things I want you to tell or the story you tell, because the story you tell about me is what continues. It's what makes me memorable. And anyone that ever walks into a room and is the most memorable person in the room will achieve their goals the most effectively. Just think about it in your head. When you've gone to a party or an event and you've met someone, there's always at an event when you go home and you're talking to your wife or you're talking like, man, did you meet that guy? Yeah, was he? There's always a person who stands out.
Sure. If
it's a good party. Otherwise it sucks. You're like, everyone's boring. But what made that person interesting? Now, I think in a lot of instances, it's the fact that the person who's very interesting isn't a big talker, but they're very interested and they bring out the best in you. And you feel like, man, they were so interested in me and they give good stories. And they ask me questions I'd never been asked before. And that kind of elevates a certain level in you where you get excited to be around them. Some people have a natural charisma and you analyze, what is a natural charisma? What is it that they do when they walk in the room? They approach with confidence. They typically approach not a direct thing. So another thing that is very important, body posture, body positioning, and how you walk up to somebody you don't know instantly puts you at ease or makes you feel ill at ease and like they're intruding your space. If somebody walks up to you too close, whoa, bro, what are you doing? Chill out. If somebody approaches you quickly and they're talking and they're not slowing down and you don't know when they're gonna leave, then you start getting this feeling of, oh God, am I stuck in this conversation for a while? Versus, and I learned this doing restaurants when I was a kid, if I walk up to you at an angle and it looks like I'm 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and you're seeing one of my eyes, which is again, the way animals react, instead of head on, which scares them, but at a sideways. And if I give you a time constraint, which is, oh, great to meet you. And for me, performing magic, people might not want me there. They don't know who I am, especially at a restaurant where you're having dinner and you're like, who is this kid? And I was 14 and do I have to tip him? Oh my God, do I have any cash on me? All of these things go through your mind. So I have to take away those layers of resistance. And I learned early on what I could do in those moments that applies to everything in life. It's not just about the performance, it's life skills. And I think those life skills translate very effectively into habits for success, no matter what you do.
It seems like you are, to simplify, extremely perceptive about other people. Like you're picking up cues that maybe to you seem like they could be picked up by a lot of people, but your ability, at least the way you're describing it, to read people really, really quickly is astounding. And I'll say, on a much smaller level, I actually did, when I was in the SEAL teams, I did a lot of the speaking with locals. Basically, we'd be on target, and then at the end of whatever conflict we were in, there'd be an opportunity to speak to people that were in whatever village we were in Afghanistan. And truthfully, you're basically talking to the men, and you're trying to discern if they were just shooting at you or they weren't. And it's really hard to tell. And a lot of times, even with the interpreter, a conversation's not going to get you there.
No.
You're really just trying to gauge how they view me.
Intuition and instinct go a long way, right? If you have a gut feeling, you have to trust it. Then try to verify it. But if you get that gut feeling and you ignore it, like, that like tickling of like, this doesn't feel right, I'm sure in your situation, that's life or death.
Yeah, this was like relatively safe, so we're safe at this point. But a lot of times I would pick up very quickly if someone was just positioning themselves in a sort of adversarial way. Like, I'm sure, I'm speaking to the guy who knows this stuff, but there's a way you stand if you're almost sort of seeking a level of conflict with the person you're with.
Right.
If you're deferential, you're sort of positioning yourself in such a way. But like, I'm coming into the room, I'm decked out in like special operations gear, we've just secured the target, and I'm talking to you. And if you're gonna stand toe to toe with me
Right.
and like look me square in the eyes, pretty much immediately I'm like, well, this is a combatant.
Right.
You know, whereas other people, maybe they're scared or whatever, but it usually comes off very quickly. And then the conversation, to be honest, it wound up being like irrelevant. It's the first like 3 seconds that I'm with somebody. And so for you, I mean, I have no idea if that relates, but are you like reading people and that's basically your tell? Or are you constantly evaluating people, whether it's during a performance or not, like in your life?
Yes.
Are you constantly evaluating? Like, how does that work for you?
So thankfully the stakes are much lower for me. So I don't ever want to put myself on the category of a Navy SEAL defending our country. It's like what I'm doing is entertaining people.
Sure.
And the skills don't generalize. So the next part is people just say, well, if you're this good, why aren't you just winning millions of dollars playing poker?
Oh,
why aren't
interesting.
you like catching, killers? So it's because, again, this is under the guise of entertainment and the skills don't generalize. Very clear cut. Guessing, I'll give a great example. I'm gonna do this in a moment. But if I were to ask at the table and we're playing poker,
Yep.
just look at why the cards are right, because I have a series of things that I do, procedures, to narrow the options down and figure out what you thought of that involve me being in charge.
Interesting.
Watch this. Let's just play a fun game.
Okay.
Picture now a card trick. Right now, if I had a deck of cards, and I don't even have one, I could probably get one out of a bag, and you
I
don't
can
have a deck of
imagine
cards.
a deck of cards.
Right? You've never seen a deck of cards today, have you?
No.
No. So when I was a magician, we'd have to have a deck of cards right now, and I would do the old pick one card,
Sure.
and you'd put it back, and I'd find it.
Right.
But I don't have a deck of cards, so let's just pantomime this, because mentalism is about thoughts. I give you an invisible deck.
Okay, got it.
You mix them up, John.
Okay.
Shuffle them up. Let's see those skills. Okay. And now
All right.
you take those cards, and I want you to do this. I want you to spread them out in front of you. And spreading them out in front of you means you can see all 52.
Yep.
And you can make a conscious decision, which some people would say later, well, he somehow influenced you. He used certain words, maybe used certain hand gestures. Something was already planted in your mind
Okay.
so that you would do my bidding.
Okay.
So I want to make this even more impossible. Take the cards and close them up again. Give one more shuffle just to be safe. I love it. And now you're going to spread them face down, which means you can't see them.
All right.
Which means that right now, if I told you to reach down and pick any card, there's no way that you could be influenced because you don't even know which one it is. Now, I want you to slowly reach down and maybe go to grab one and go, nah, doesn't feel right. And you maybe jump to another one next to it or this one and just grab one card at random. Now, before you turn over, you grab it out.
Okay.
And agree in agreement, it's absolutely impossible that I could know what you just picked because it's not real. It's an invisible card that you haven't even turned over yet. You don't even know what it is,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So you drop the rest of the cards away, gone, and now something happens that's interesting. You turn the card over, you look at it,
Okay.
okay?
Okay.
Hold it up, and I want you to picture that card right there. Can you see it?
Yep.
Now watch. I didn't influence this in any way, did I? This is your own choice, 100%.
100%.
And I say to you, hearts, diamonds, clubs, spades, there's all the four suits, there's the high cards, the low cards, all of these different cards. And you had said earlier, blackjack, poker, look at that card. Imagine what it looks like. Imagine the jack, queen, and king have more ink because they're very full. They've painted them. Versus, for example, a two only has the two hearts and they go all the way through. And you know what you did? You decided, because poker on the back of the box, ace of spades is the card in your hand, isn't it?
Yeah. What the hell, dude? That's crazy. Yeah, it's the ace of spades.
Ace of spades.
Yeah. It's
An
the ace of
invisible deck of
spades.
cards didn't exist. So that, I know
Dude,
it seems.
That's crazy.
Thank you.
I changed my mind like 4 times.
I could tell you did. I saw that, the shifting and the changing, and you're like, I might go with the different. You were thinking of a different spade, but you said, no, I'm going to go back. That has to do with,
Dude,
again,
that's crazy. That's crazy. I was actively trying to subvert you. That's
so
crazy.
I can't do that at a poker table because I can't just tell the guy in front of me, look at your two cards before we get the river, look at me, do this, do that. They're gonna be like, screw you, dude, I'm not doing any of this. Get out of my face. Put on the sunglasses, rock and roll. So in my performance, I'm the director. I get to call the shots.
Wow.
So it doesn't unfortunately work with everything. If it did, it'd be amazing. But to answer your question, I'm not living my life in like brrr mode of like, whoop, that guy. I always think of it as in the Bourne Identity.
Oh yeah.
When he loses memory and he's in that diner and he doesn't know who he is yet.
Yeah.
And he's like, and he tells the guy next to him, why do I know that guy's 255 and can fight? Why do I know this? Why do I know that right now I know the 4 license plates of the cars when I walked in? Why do I know all this stuff? And he's starting to dawn on him. He's like a secret spy agent.
Yeah.
Badass. So I think it's likened to that, where when I turn it on, I'm hyper focused on what I do and my mission at hand. And the analyzing people very quickly is very, very similar to what you did, except it's done for under the context of entertainment, which is when I'm in a crowd, I'm looking around to see who I think will be great for my next trick when I'm performing. This person right now. And if you ask me, why was he so good? People will come up to me at the end of the show and go, why didn't you pick me? And I go, no offense to you. I just, for whatever reason, and it's the intangible, it's the 30 years of training, you just weren't as good as them right now. I thought they would deliver the best reaction and they would mesh with what I wanted. Now in certain rooms, I can't pick the person. You're on TV with 3 hosts, you gotta use those 3 hosts. You make the best of a situation, but when I have people to choose from, and if you see me at like a live show, that's very exciting. And the fact that you like throw Frisbees, we pick people randomly. If we're in like an arena, we shoot t-shirts to like the 8th row, who's got it, stand up please. And how could I know who would catch the t-shirt? How could I know who'd catch a Frisbee? How could you know any of this stuff? Then I work with those people, and that's what really makes it real because, that's anyone. This is some drunk jerk who's like 8 rows in, who's, barely conscious. How in the world did you guess the name of his first crush?
I'm still sort of in shock that you just did. So I'm like thinking through how are you doing this? I realize that there's more to it than like you, here's how I was pretty good at, the reason I was the guy that did a lot of the questioning of the people on site is because I had decent perception. I was pretty good at figuring out who likely had more information, and it would like lead to weapons caches or whatever. So it was just like, basically, I was successful enough that I kept doing it. So I was pretty perceptive, but like,
I think you still are.
Well, thank you. But it's like, to be able to break down beyond a gut feeling to like specifics is just, where we've talked about this thing that you do, when you're making it out, you're very humble about it. Like, you can learn how to do it and whatever it is. But like, no, you can't.
I had to. Like, again, I wasn't Spider-Man, bitten by a spider and radioactive and like I changed. It's been trial and error. It's been iteration. And the same thing that has allowed me to go run 153 miles, that, like, how you have children. We were talking about right when I walked in, we had a couple minutes. I came here from the airport talking about our kids, and you want to instill a work ethic in your kids. It's very interesting because being a parent, I think, is my most important job. And I'm assuming that's my immortality. It's like, who are they going to be? Because as soon as you have kids, you start to feel like, I'm going to die one day and this is my future and their future. And it's like, it really, no greater joy in life. But how do I instill a work ethic in them? Because my kids aren't going to grow up the same as me. And I'm feeling, I don't know what you're beginning to remind, we're very humble, where I had to work really hard. And I was like age 16, I was supporting myself, which I don't wish upon my kids. They'll never know what that means. But I lived on my own and I had to pay for college and I had to find an apartment, and like nobody paid for this stuff. So I had to figure life out early, which at the time I felt kind of pissed because I'm like, all these other kids are going on vacation. They have a car, their parents. I don't have any of that. But now in hindsight, that set me up for success in a huge way. And it made it so I didn't have a safety net. So I had to become the safety net. And I think that there's a level of that toughness you have to either create in yourself, if it's not, and a lot of people are going to have it because a lot of people listening to this are, hustling and they might not have any of these things. So I think that deciding on a goal and not giving up is it's so much more important than almost natural talent, skill, anything is persistence. And you saying like, oh, I can't do this, there shouldn't be that word in your vocabulary.
You said something going back to your Spartathlon experience that actually really struck a chord with me. And I'll give you a quick story that I think relates, and I think that it plays into what you just said. So when you did not finish your Spartathlon race, you came back and you obviously did it, and you successfully completed this.
It ate me alive. Are you kidding me? It killed me.
But you said something to the effect of, when I went into that second attempt, I was prepared to basically die in order to complete this race. So for me, I've had exactly that experience one time, and it changed my life afterwards. When I was in SEAL training, everyone thinks the hard part is at the beginning of training, the famous sort of like hell week, and you're running around on the beach and you're beat down and you're tired. That's bad.
Right.
Not the hardest part. The hardest part comes about halfway through training. It's a 6-month-long course. Halfway through, you're in the underwater phase. And by this point, statistically, virtually everybody in your class is going to graduate, despite the difficulty of this test. It's the moment you all are literally forced to have this moment. And it's horrifying. There's this test called pool competency. They tell you it's just this. You just go in with your scuba tanks, and the instructors are going to come down there. You're in the 9-foot section of the pool, and you're like crawling around, and they're going to come down and just kind of screw with you, and you're going to follow procedures that you're taught to basically, after they finish tumbling you around and turning your air off, you go back on your knees, and they're watching you the whole time, and you follow these steps. You reach back, you turn on your air, you check your J valve, you check your straps, make sure it's a 3-finger loop here, you check your weight belt. I can still do it now, but it's a procedure that no matter what happens to you underwater, you reset, you follow the procedure. But each problem that they give you, whether it's tying a knot in your hose or whatever it is, gets progressively harder to fix. All fixable problems for 20 minutes. And so each time someone's come down on you, first of all, as they're attacking you, you have to go into the fetal position and just wait. You're not getting air. They're tumbling you around. So you're going about 60 seconds to 90 seconds with no air. And then you need to follow the procedure. So you can see you become more and more hypercapnic.
Right.
You're not breathing. And it's this test of staying calm and following the procedures despite literally being on the precipice of passing out.
Right.
People call it simulated drowning, this test, and you get 4 attempts at it. And so and one of the things you got to do is you got to stay calm. And so I went in and I'm doing the test, failed it miserably 4 times in a row. Wasn't even close. Was not even close. Like, I actually was the guy that they had to put a pink piece of tape around my ankle, and it wasn't even to humiliate me. I would get so panicked, I would push off the bottom of the pool and go to the surface, but we're breathing mixed gas. And if you do that, you can risk rupturing your lungs with air bubbles. And so you have to be you have to go up at a certain speed. And so there's like standby divers there to keep me from panicking and rocketing to the surface. And so I failed 4 times in a row. And as a result, I actually got rolled out of the class I was in. The class I was with, all my buddies, and they're like, look, we're going to give you one more shot. You're going to leave this class, go to the next class, and you can try again with that class. And so I go to the next class.
So that sets you back 6 months?
It actually was just a couple months. They let me start in second phase. But so I go into the next class. And the thing is the students in this class, they've been through the Hell Week and everything, and they know I'm a rollback. And I sort of took on the role of like, I'm going to be a mentor. Like, yeah, I obviously failed pool competency. We're all going to take it here soon. But I really tried hard to be like a mentor. Like, here's what I experienced. I obviously failed it, but let me give you all the insights I can possibly give you. And everyone's looking at me like, oh, John's got it. Like, he failed, but he's going to be fine. And so we get to test day, and I failed the first 2 attempts, not out of panic, out of procedural problems. And so I fail on Friday. There's 2 more attempts left, and it's on that Monday. And if I don't pass them, not only will it humiliate me, but I'm dropped from SEAL training. That weekend was horrible because I'm thinking about this test. On Monday morning, I got to the pool deck, and I was so nervous all weekend. And I'm sitting on the pool deck. They make you sit with your back to the pool, and they made me go last that day. And I'm hearing the instructors like ripping kids' hoses. You're like air bubbling up off the pool. Kids are like passing out like red line, and medics running over. It's chaos, and you're just sitting there waiting for your turn. And then when it was my turn, I just had this mental shift occur where I was like, holy shit, I'm gonna fucking die in that pool before I fail this test. And I got in the water, and it was like calm comes over me. And I begin this test, and it didn't matter how long I went without air. It didn't matter what the problem was. I had fully committed to this concept of I will literally die before I fail this test. And I passed, and it was so easy. And it showed me that like there's a point where you can convince yourself that your mind can sort of override all the discomfort, and you can basically do whatever you want. And you described when you went and did the Spartathlon the second time, that feeling of, I will die before I don't finish this race.
100%.
And sure enough, you did it. And so do you think that's something everybody can achieve, that level of, I will go full send no matter what? Because I think for you, clearly, you put yourself in pressure situations and you just go for it. Like, I feel like maybe that's something that we have that others don't, or do you think that anyone can tap into that?
That's such a tough question because it's so hard to speak for other people. And where mental toughness comes from. And I think you build it up over time. I don't think you're born with it at all. And it's those failures that reinforce later. Had you gotten it on the first try, where would you be today? Isn't that a funny question to ask yourself? Would you still be this person? So when I came back the second time, I had this guy who I saw at mile, like, I don't remember what mile it was. I DNF'd at 78. But it was this bald dude. think he was like from Eastern Europe, and he's wearing this thing, and we're in the middle of the night, and I'm a wreck. I'm a wreck, bro. Like, just been puking maybe 100 times, and now I'm writing my DNF speech, which in the parlance of ultra marathoning is did not finish. They don't write a time next to your name, they write DNF, which is so embarrassing and just kills you. And so I've already written my speech, what I'm gonna tell my wife, when I went to Greece and spent all this money, and my friends who were like, dude, how'd you do on that race? And you gotta eat it and tell everyone, well, you gotta have that story of like, I'm gonna learn from this experience and I'm gonna come back stronger, like all that bullshit that no, you should have finished. And so I see this guy and I'm already talking all this stuff like, oh man, I don't have it today. We're at an aid station together, middle of the night. We haven't slept all night. And this guy looks at me, he doesn't really understand English, and his eyes, he's these crazy eyes where they're open. I'll never forget it. He looked at me and he goes, if you cannot run, you walk. If you cannot walk, you crawl. But you never stop. Like a psycho, like a zombie apocalypse. And in the moment, I couldn't digest it, right? I couldn't take that and bottle it up and shoot it into my vein. But slowly, after I left, it haunted me.
Yeah.
Because this guy, like what he had in his eyes is what I need to have the next year. And so that like slowly worked into my DNA. And when I got there, I was you on that attempt. When I started, there was no doubt. There's no doubt.
Yep.
I am finishing this thing no matter what. And when the voice enters my head that says you aren't finishing, hey, what are you talking about? You don't exist. Gone. We go right back to the mindset. I'm hardened steel, titanium, where I'm finishing no matter what. And if that means I'm walking the next 24 hours, puking with a splint on my leg, I'm finishing this race because now this is life or death.
That's incredible. Yeah, it's funny. I rarely meet people that have had a comparable experience to what I described with pool comp, but it's so clear, like for you, this is like a defining moment. And so if people understand that in their own lives, that if your thing is, oh man, I really want to start a business. Oh man, I really want to run a Spartathlon or be a SEAL or whatever it is, whatever someone's goal is, however big or small, if the stakes were as big as they could possibly be, you could do it.
Right.
Or you could die trying. That's the level of commitment that some people need to understand goes into success. It's a compounding effect.
Right.
As soon as I became a SEAL, it showed me that I now have the capacity to set big goals and achieve them, not be someone who claims to want to do things, but then write the DNF story of why I never actually did it.
Right. And that knowledge, that exact way you said, the knowledge that you did it now changes the way your mind is wired. Because now you go, oh my God, what else could I do? And now if I set my mind to it, you start to believe in yourself in a certain way. And that becomes self-fulfilling. So I think for whatever people do, again, if it's inspirational messaging, like my book is designed to be motivational, but it's designed to be action oriented. Like I want to teach people.
Actually, I'll hold it up while you're talking.
How to take action. So like literally the words I used, and I thought about this a lot, was proven habits for success. Because a lot of people think you're going to get this book is that I'm going to teach you magic tricks or mentalism tricks. And the real talk is you can find those elsewhere. So the book is not going to teach you tricks. I need everyone to know because they're going to buy it and be like, dude, where do you teach me what Joe Burrow, how the hell does he throw the ball? I go, I'm not going to teach you how I do the tricks, but knowing what somebody who might have control of your life, knowing when to approach your boss, what to say, and how to get the raise that you've been working for the last 2 years, what if you could do that and up your chances by 10, 20, 30, 40% of doing that and getting them to do what you want? That, to me, is worth a couple bucks. That's worth your time, which is even more valuable than the amount of money for the book to read it. And we got a lot of fun stories baked in there as well from my crazy life.
This book really captures the essence of someone who has put themselves in highly stressful situations and persevered, and they've lived a life of basically pretending that everything is a must succeed. And how to basically, harness your mind. And in some ways, learn how to read other people and influence other people. But this is a very powerful, I'm going to call it a self-help book, because to me, this is like practically a Bible of how to motivate and how to be the best version of yourself. So this is an amazing book. You got to check it out. Read your mind.
Your fellow Navy SEAL, David Goggins, gave me the quote on the top, which says, learn to master the most powerful weapon, your mind, which encapsulates what the entire book is all about, which is your mind controls your success. Whatever success is defined for you, which for everyone is different. Maybe it's monetary, maybe it's romantic, maybe it's want to have kids, maybe it's like, I just want to do something I'm not doing now. And how do you get from step A to B to C? And I know that sounds so silly, but in almost every instance, other people are involved in that journey. And my whole training has been how to win over people, how to know what they're thinking, how to influence them, right? How to get rid of the fear of rejection and failure, which is a huge part of my book, which is mostly what holds people back. That is such a huge factor. And I learned that at a young age, doing like restaurant magic and all those little things I learned how to iterate and improve. I want to give you decades of the mistakes I made, but I want to distill out of them what you can do to fast track your success.
That's amazing. This is awesome.
Let me ask you a question, John. If I told you right now, okay, the book is in your hand,
Yep.
and I were to ask you to flip to any page you wanted, impulsive, spontaneous, in my book, any page you wanted, and look at it and then pick any word, and then I try to guess the word. On the surface, that seems crazy, right? That seems amazing.
Yeah.
But I'm watching this like somebody at home, and I want to go to the skeptic, not the normal person, but the outlier, the 1 out of 100 who goes, yo, but he wrote the book. I wrote the book. So what if I have a photographic memory? What if I know it's on every single page? And if I could see what page you're on, I could say, right, that could have happened. That's a plausible but very improbable solution. So what if instead of doing that, because this is my book,
right?
Can we just see this room? This is for, by the way, shout out to your team, sick. The setup here is incredible.
It is pretty good.
For this interview, amazing. I've been to a lot of interviews and this might take the cake.
All right.
Hundreds and hundreds of books, probably thousands.
Yeah.
So if I were to instead ask you to walk up to any one of these books, now not physically, but mentally, if I would have said, walk up to any book in this room, grab it, walk up, and I want you to flip it open to any page, to look at that page, and to go back and forth, and my eyes are closed, to visit and stop at any word. Can you see this happening? Close your eyes, and in your mind's eye, envision that occurring. Did you just play it out?
Yep.
Okay. Open your eyes. Be honest, right? These people trust you. They've seen you for years. This isn't staged. This isn't set up. There is no conceivable way I could know what you would have done. You didn't even know what you were going to do before I asked you to.
Yeah, fair.
When people flip, some people will find a specific page that has a meaning to them. Like maybe a kid's birthday, maybe it's January 24th, so you go to 124 to be fun about it. Or some people just flip to a random page. Now watch, I watch to see the reaction. I don't think you got nostalgic. Personal reference, the page you picked, it doesn't have a meaning to you, does it?
No.
I didn't think so. I didn't see it that way. I also see it as when you just flip, you go, stop. You were quick. You felt rushed, so you rushed. I could see it. You feel a little tense. So some people would, and they would have gone longer in the book. Again, you don't have to tell me this. Do we have a marker? Do we have something we could write with?
I have a pen.
A pen? Okay, I'm gonna close. Is that your pen?
It is my pen.
Okay, I'm gonna close my eyes, and I want you to do this close to your body and on the palm of your hand, and make sure there's no way I could see this and there's no camera behind you. Does it write? Does the pen write?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna close my eyes. On the palm of your hand with no camera, nothing behind you, write as big as you can what page number you went to in the book. When you're done, blow on it, put it close to your chest. Nobody could have seen that, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Can I open my eyes?
Yep.
My gut says, again, I'm fishing. Did I get a bite? Yes. I reel it in. I think you went with an earlier page. My gut says, because I was seeing what you would do, I think it was 2 digits. Now I ask myself, look at the smile, the laugh, you might as well said yes. So I keep going. It's so unlikely that you would have done the first 30 or 40 pages because it's too, you can't even flip the page. You open a book and you go, it's already off your thumb before I've even got to page 50. So now what feels like a number that's got like some text, but not, and I think that you would have done right the backward hat, couple buttons open, showing some chest hair. He's more of an odd type of guy than an even. You're not a by the book. I think you might have thought of the number, chuckled, and been like inappropriate. So you wouldn't have done 69, even though that's so funny. You did 67, didn't you? Can we see your hand? Is the number 67?
Yeah. Dude, that's insane. What, dude? How?
Any book, any page, but any word is near infinite. I don't want you to write anything. People are going to say he's got a trick hand, he's got a trick pen. This is your stuff.
Yeah,
don't
this
write
is
down
legitimate.
a thing. Whatever word you saw in your mind in a book, not a real book, you imagine. Throw the pen away. I want you to count without using your fingers,
Okay.
to count the number of letters to yourself, not out loud, in the word you selected, just to yourself. Count it to yourself. Don't say it out loud at the end. Some people, right when they get it, they say it. All right. No, maybe.
I have to double check. Hold on.
Oh, don't even say that. Now you gave so much away. The double check is always an indicator of a longer word. No one double checks a word. Open your eyes.
Okay.
No one double checks a word that's 5 letters or less. No one. So now we know it's longer. Also, you probably would have done a longer word. Nobody does and, the, he, she, if.
No.
Under this level of pressure, no way. We're balling, baby. I think he did a longer word. I think this place, it's got this ambiance of like gravity. And you know, some of these books are probably hundreds of years old. Okay, think of the word. You counted twice. Most people, when they count the second time, they realize they got it wrong, and they realize, oh crap, I counted wrong the first time, and you did that. But they usually count longer and then shorter, and that's what you did. And my gut says you were like, no, it's not. You thought it was 9, but it's actually 8 letters, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what happened in your mind. That's not even. And imagine that you write down the word. You're not going to write a thing. I want this to be all in your mind. You write down 8 letters, like hangman.
Yep.
You reach over and you just go back and forth, and you don't know why, but you stop on one letter and you circle that one letter. You circle one letter somewhere in the word.
Got it.
Did you do it? In the word is how I cue you. When I say that, almost nobody does the first letter. The first letter will give away the rest of the word for a lot of people. And then also in makes it feel like it should be in between. You didn't do the first letter, did you? No, see, I was trying to guide you. And then a lot of people will avoid the vowels because we know there's vowels. You didn't do a vowel, did you? So again, we're going down that path. And now you jump back and forth. You're like, do I do this one? And my gut said you were about to do a letter, but and you jumped over. The letter you're thinking of, no, I don't think, it's not in the word more than once, is it?
It is.
It is, right? It is, because you jump between the two of them.
But yeah.
And what's weird is the first letter you were about to circle, but you didn't. You were going to do a T, and you didn't. You're thinking of an S, aren't you?
Yes.
Swear to them. There's no setup here. This is not staged.
If you wrote this is going to be
literally,
mind
we have a book, a room with hundreds of books, thousands of books. You imagine in your mind picking one up, opening it up, and going to any word. Close your eyes. Can you cover them with your hand, please? I want to show them at home because people will say later that I changed what I wrote somehow.
All right.
His eyes are covered. Can we see this from any camera or no? Have we seen one? Open your eyes. What are you picturing in your mind? You flipped an invisible book to page 67. You saw hundreds of words. You stopped. One of them jumped out at you. What was that word?
Chastise.
Chastise.
What the hell, dude? That's such a random word. That's crazy. This is not staged. This is crazy. That's crazy. I picked that because that's the most bizarre word I could think of. That's crazy, man. I don't even know what to say. I'm like looking at other people. Like I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. That is, I got to be honest. I don't even know what to say. I'm shocked. I knew you probably would be able to do this, but this is not set up. But he walked in, and within 2 minutes we were filming. This is. I'm blown away.
Create memorable moments that people take and the stories they tell. And you could chastise me, but you got a story that's going to live in your brain for a while. That's my goal. Is I just put a splinter in your brain.
Oh my
that you're going to try to
God.
pick out for years and be like, how did he know? And I wasn't even going to do page 67. I did that at the last minute. I changed.
That is so wild. What was like your first time doing this? Like your first big moment of big trick with a big audience, and you nailed it.
So I think certain things in life can't be bought, but have to be earned.
Sure.
The same way when you're in SEALs training, there's no check you can write to get that, right? So certain things in life you really have to earn. And so when I did that show, America's Got Talent,
Yeah.
I never expected to go as far as I did. I was truly, this isn't like, this false humility. Every round I was in, I gave it my all, and I didn't think what I'm going to do next. It's just like when I hear wide receivers who at tight ends, when they say, what do you focus on when the ball gets thrown your way? Catching it. You do not think of what you're going to do after you catch the ball or you drop the ball. And so my mindset every single time was this: I'm going to just do everything I can in this round, kill it. And that's it. I never saw, and then there was no and then, which I think is a powerful thing to do, because as soon as you start thinking and then, you start getting hung up and you drop the ball. So where do I go with this? Every round, at the end of it, it was the highs and lows were insane. Because the highs were like, I just made it through. The lows were like, oh crap, I didn't plan what I'm going to do next round, which might be in a week or two. It's got to be better than this. So it was like these two mixed emotions. So when I got to the finale, this was like the heyday of the show in linear TV, which now people are like, TV, where do I watch TV? Online? This is when like 15 million people would tune in live. Radio City Music Hall, live. That means I am on a stage, Radio City Music, there's 6,000 people in the audience, and this is airing to everyone live, which means if you screw up, ain't no safety net. You don't get caught. You don't go, cut. It's not going right. So if chastise isn't the word, if you didn't think of the letter S, if none of those things happened, I can't get out of it.
Oh
so my
gosh,
finale,
that's intense.
That was one of those moments that was life-changing.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah.
I believe it. So you've accomplished so much, and you clearly are somebody that is taking big swings, like you've said. Do you have any sort of like bucket list life items that still are like, I really want to accomplish that at some point?
It's funny you think that, because I think I'm just starting. So like in my mind, I'm so forward facing, and it's something I tell myself on a regular basis to like live in the moment, because it's always like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? And that's a problem in life, because when you do earn certain things or have like pinch me moments, I have pinch me moments where I'm like in the room with Steven Spielberg or LeBron, and like you just have this moment of like, dude, just think back to you 20 years ago. If you could go in a time machine, meet yourself, like Marty McFly, and be like, you're not going to believe what you're going to do in 10 years or 20 years. But there's a lot of things. Having my own series, I'm so excited about that. That's been years and years and years in the making, of having not just all these clips that you see, but a show that you get to see who I am, not just what I do.
Right.
So you get to get a feeling for like, what am I? Who am I? What makes me tick? And hopefully the book too, which is for years something I didn't feel confident to write a book, because I'm like, what story do I have to tell, man? Like, I do these cool tricks, that's awesome, but I started to really see that I think some of the things that I do in my life that are surrounding the mentalism are the actual hidden tricks and tips for success. This whole thing, mentalism, is very fresh and new. It's been around for 100+ years, but I think people are just getting this awareness of it. And it's because of the sports teams, it's because of these things, but they're starting to see like, this isn't magic. This is really cool and different, and it captivates people's imaginations. And I'm trying to elevate the field, not just for myself, but like the other people that do it. It's kind of like the rising tide lifts all ships. It's good for my industry, it's good for us, and it makes what I do like cool and innovative. And I like the fact that I'm being tied to it, where I want to be the name brand for this art. When you ask somebody in 5 years, who's your favorite mentalist? If you ask them that today, the question is, what's a mentalist? In 5 years, if I've done my job right, the instant answer to that question, you mean like O's the mentalist? Like the Google, the Kleenex, you create the moniker and the brand because you've aligned yourself so closely with what this is that people associate you with it.
Dude, on that note, where's your book? That's amazing. We got to make sure that if you want more insights from the world's greatest mentalist, check out Read Your Mind. It's his new book by Oz Perlman. This is incredible. It has all those tips, tricks, secrets, mental hacks, you name it. You got to go check it out. Thank you so much for being on here. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks,
Take care,
man. Thank you.
Seriously, mind blown. This is, I don't even know what this is. Chastise 67, crazy. Thank you, Oz.
You got it.
In the early morning hours of March 27, 2003, a 4-year-old boy was lying in bed in rural Ohio when he suddenly heard his door open. Now, he assumed it was just his great-grandparents coming in to check on him, and so, he's a kid, he just pretended to be asleep. But he heard whoever this was make their way across the bedroom because he heard the floorboards creaking, and at some point they were standing right next to his bed. And so curious, the little boy opened his eyes. And what he saw standing next to his bed was not his great-grandparents. It was a huge green monster. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload 2, 3, even 4 times a week. So if that's of interest to you, the next time the like button goes on vacation, do them a favor and paint the entire exterior of their house a blinding neon yellow. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. On the evening of Wednesday, March 26, 2003, a 55-year-old woman named Linda Myers drove down a secluded two-lane road in Darke County, Ohio. Darke County was very rural. It was basically just very small towns and farmland. And so as Linda drove down the road, kind of in the middle of nowhere, she looked out her window and she saw the sun setting over a field. She was coming home from the pizza shop that she and her husband Jack owned in a town nearby. Linda eventually turned down a gravel road and onto the sprawling 40-acre farm where she and her husband lived. She parked outside their old farmhouse, and then she grabbed a deposit bag with money from the pizza shop out of the back seat, and then she got out of her car. Their farm was so isolated that she couldn't hear any cars on the road or anything from the neighbors' houses. So it was completely quiet, except for the sheep that were bleating in the field and the occasional sound of power tools coming from the barn. She walked around to the back of the barn, and she found Jack hunched over the engine of a beat-up old car. The two of them had been married for about 7 years, and even though this was actually Linda's third marriage, she really felt like Jack was her soulmate. In addition to owning the shop with Linda, the pizza shop, Jack also had a full-time job at a manufacturing plant, and he also had a side business restoring cars. And so Linda often found him out here behind the barn working on a car around the time the sun was going down. And sitting in the grass beside the car, playing with a wrench, was Linda's 4-year-old great-grandson, Damien. And the second Damien saw Linda, he smiled and he got up and he rushed over to her to give her a big hug. And Damien's smile made Linda feel sort of bittersweet. Damien was the son of Linda's granddaughter, Amber. But Amber had gotten pregnant at just 14 years old, and so as a result had not been in any position to take care of a baby. So Linda and Jack had offered to take Damien in and raise him for a few years while Amber finished high school and got on her feet. However, this was definitely not a perfect arrangement for many reasons, but one of those reasons was because Damien's father was furious about being cut out of the custody agreement. Even now, 4 years after, Damien's situation had been decided, the father still argued with Linda about how she wouldn't let him see his son. But Linda felt like as much as he was saying he wanted to be in Damien's life, she felt like at some point he was going to abandon this child. And so she really didn't want him to be around Damien at all. She didn't want her great-grandson to be abandoned like that. And besides, Damien would have another father figure in his life soon enough. Because in the past few years, Amber had finished school, she had met a new man, and gotten married. And as soon as Damien finished up this year of preschool in a couple of months, Amber and her new husband were planning to take him in and raise him on their own. Linda was proud of Amber, how she had turned her life around, but she also felt a little sad, bittersweet, because she and Jack were going to miss having Damien around. They loved him. He was basically their son. Linda knew that Jack clearly was busy with this car and kind of didn't want to be interrupted. So she just said a quick hello and then scooped Damien up and carried him over to the farmhouse. She opened up the door and she sat him down and told him to go wash up before dinner. Then she went into the kitchen and she dropped the deposit bag from the pizza shop into a chair in the dining room. The bag was full of cash, and her plan was to drop it off at the bank in the morning. Linda got out a pan and began cooking dinner, and pretty soon her husband Jack came inside, covered in car grease. While Jack washed his hands at the kitchen sink, Linda asked him about his day. And Jack kind of grumbled about this customer that he had sold a car to on a payment plan the previous year, who had now missed 3 payments in a row. Jack said he was going to have to drive out there to the person's house tomorrow and repossess the car. Linda could see, Jack is obviously pretty tense here, but Linda knew it wasn't really that missed car payment that was bothering him. The truth was, Jack had been sort of tense really for the past week, ever since he had had this big argument with his 25-year-old son, Greg. Greg had always been very shy and mild-mannered and really close with his dad. In fact, he was the best man at Jack and Linda's wedding. But recently, Greg's life had been falling off the rails. He was in the middle of a divorce, he was struggling with drinking and drug abuse, and he'd been missing shifts at work. And so earlier that month, he had come by to ask Jack for money because his house was about to be foreclosed on. And Jack had drawn a line and said no. He told Greg that if he wanted to keep his house, he'd have to clean up his act and get back to work. And so that had led to a very big fight. And so now Linda had a feeling that Jack was genuinely worried that he'd done real damage to his relationship with Greg, perhaps irreparably. Because something pretty similar had also happened with Jack's other son, Travis. About 7 years earlier, when Travis was 21, he and Jack had gotten into this big argument that was so bad, Travis moved out, and then the two of them had not spoken since for 7 years. So Linda thought Jack must be worried that that would be the same thing that would happen with him and Greg. So while Jack washed his hands, Linda rubbed his shoulders and told him not to worry about Greg. He had a good head on his shoulders, and he just needed a little nudge to get back on track, and that's all Jack had done. She reassured him that he'd made the right call and Greg would get through this rough patch sooner or later. Then Linda set the table and called the family to dinner. A little while later, after they'd eaten and cleaned up, Linda looked up at the clock and realized it was getting kind of late. Damien had preschool in the morning, and she didn't want him to be tired and grumpy. So she scooped him up and took him to his room upstairs to get ready for bed. She helped him change into his PJs, she brushed his teeth, then tucked him in, gave him a kiss goodnight, and closed the door. Linda went back downstairs, and before long, she and Jack were getting ready for bed too. Before long, Linda was in her bedroom, she had turned on a lamp, she had changed into her PJs and crawled under the covers. And then once Jack was settled in next to her, she turned off the light, and they fell asleep. But several hours later, Linda was suddenly woken up by this horribly loud noise, and she sat up and looked around, and when her eyes finally adjusted to the darkness, she gasped. The next morning, at a church a mile away from Linda and Jack's house, a preschool teacher was getting ready to start class, but she noticed there was an empty chair in her classroom. One of her students, 4-year-old Damien Huffman, was late. She knew Damien's great-grandparents led busy lives and had several different jobs and businesses, so she figured they must just be running late. So she began class and hoped they would just drop Damien off before he missed too much. And about an hour later, at 9:30 a.m., she was leading the class in morning sing-alongs when Damien suddenly came sprinting into the classroom. Now, at first, the teacher was relieved that Damien had shown up, but then she realized Damien looked frazzled and out of breath, and he didn't have his backpack, and he was wearing PJs, and there was the smear of something brown on his shirt. She ran over to him and knelt down next to him and realized the brown spot was dried blood. The teacher asked Damien what was going on, and he looked at her with this scared, confused expression, and he told her his great-grandparents' faces were melting. Over this past winter break, when myself, my wife, and my 3 kids were home, I was sent this package of My Mochi, which is like ice cream, these little bites of premium ice cream wrapped in this sweet, chewy dough. And I was told, like, hey, try this out, see if you like it, and see if you want to advertise this product. And I'm like, all right, I obviously tried the product, and I am hooked on My Mochi. Like, seriously, I was blown away by how good these things are. I was sent strawberry, mango, and cookies and cream. And let me tell you, cookies and cream is out of this world. It's so refreshing. That's the way my wife and I refer to My Mochi, as being like very refreshing. And so we plow through all this mochi we got sent, and literally we went out before this big snowstorm. We went out to the grocery store before it shut down because of the storm, just to buy all the mochi we could. Crushed it. It's so good. It's only 70 calories. It's gluten-free. It's so good, you gotta try it. My Mochi, it's the best. Each purple box comes with 6 perfectly portioned mochi snacks, available in mouth-watering flavors like strawberry, mango, and cookies and cream. Cookies and cream, really quite good. Feel joyfully chill with every bite of My Mochi ice cream. Look for the purple box of My Mochi ice cream in the freezer aisle of your local grocery store. It's really, really good. About 15 minutes later, a police sergeant named Mark Whitaker, along with his partner, drove down a secluded road toward a farmhouse in rural Ohio. Sergeant Whitaker had been a detective for the Darke County Sheriff's Department for 5 years, and he was in charge of the investigative unit. So when the department had gotten a very strange 911 call that morning from a local preschool, he was sent out to investigate. According to the preschool teacher, a 4-year-old student named Damien Huffman had come into school covered in blood, out of breath, saying something about his great-grandparents' faces being, melting. The teacher identified the great-grandparents as Linda and Jack Myers. Now, Whitaker had no idea what Damien meant when he had said that their faces were melting, or what kind of situation, Whitaker and his partner would be walking into when they got to the farm. But he had a feeling it would not be good. They pulled up to the farm and parked at the end of the long gravel road. And when Whitaker got out of his car, he immediately noticed how eerily quiet it was. There was another farmhouse just across the road and a few more on the horizon, but otherwise they were surrounded by empty fields in every direction. Whitaker began walking towards the front door when he saw the front door was already wide open, but there was no clear sign of forced entry. But nonetheless, Whitaker and his partner reflexively drew their weapons and they stepped inside the house. Whitaker began calling out to see if anybody was home, but there was no response. From where he was standing, he saw there was another open door in the house that led to a set of stairs that went down presumably to the basement. Whitaker ignored the basement for now and instead continued clearing the first floor. So he went into the kitchen, and once he was sure it was clear, he continued down the hallway until he found a doorway that led into a bedroom. And when he went inside that bedroom, he found Damien's great-grandparents, Jack and Linda Myers, and they were lying in their bed, side by side, and he could tell immediately they were both dead. Now, Jack was actually lying on his stomach, and he could tell right away there was a big bullet wound on the back of Jack's neck. As for Linda, she was on her back, and she had gunshot wounds to her face and her hand, as if she had raised her hand to defend herself before she was shot. And so at this point, Whitaker and his partner did a full search of the house just to make sure nobody else was there, and it was empty, and so the two went back to the bedroom to begin investigating the bodies. Whitaker put on a pair of latex gloves and touched the wound on Linda's face, and the blood was still warm and wet, so he figured likely they'd only been dead for maybe a few hours at most. He looked around the floor, and he didn't see any bullet casings, which meant the killer had gone through the trouble of picking them up afterwards to cover their tracks. Then, Whitaker's partner called his attention to this weird plasticky bundle that was lying on a pillow near Jack's head. Whitaker picked it up, and he saw it was a piece of quilting fabric that was balled up and covered in masking tape. His best guess was that it was a homemade gun silencer. The killer likely taped it to the end of their gun to muffle the sound of the blast, and it must have, blown off at some point when they actually began shooting. Immediately, Whitaker wondered if this was a silencer, why the killer would need one so far out in the middle of nowhere. But when Whitaker left the bedroom and went up a flight of stairs to the room right above where the murders had taken place, he found another bedroom that was full of stuffed animals and toy trucks. It was obviously Damien's room. And it was at this point that Whitaker realized, very likely the killer must have known there was going to be a toddler sleeping right upstairs when they did this, and so they needed the silencer in order to not wake the child when they committed this murder. And so this meant that the killer almost certainly knew Jack and Linda personally. Within minutes, more officers from the Dark County Sheriff's Office swarmed the property. Whitaker went outside to supervise them, and pretty quickly, a forensics officer called him over to look at a set of footprints that they had found in the mud. Whitaker followed the trail of footprints around the side of the house to a basement window. The window pane had been pried off, leaving an open hole that was just big enough for a person to squeeze through. Whitaker crouched down and looked through the open space, and he could see inside there was a set of stairs leading up to the main part of the house. And so he realized this must have been how the killer got inside. And it was also why, when they had first gone inside, that they had seen the door to the basement standing wide open. And so this only made Whitaker more sure that this crime had to have been committed by somebody close to this couple, because the killer obviously knew the layout of Linda and Jack's house. Whitaker told the forensics officer to make a cast of the footprints so they could figure out what type and size of shoe the killer was wearing. And then as Whitaker stood back up, he noticed something else. The phone lines that were running along the side of the house had clearly been severed. The killer clearly had planned ahead and made sure that nobody in this house could call for help. Just then, a truck pulled up at the end of the road, and a woman got out and started walking toward the house. Whitaker quickly went over to stop her from getting too close to the crime scene, and he asked her what she needed. And she said she was a neighbor who lived at the next property over. She said that she had seen the police cars coming down the road and she didn't really know what was going on, but she felt like she had information that they might want. The neighbor said that around 4:30 that morning, she'd seen a minivan leaving the Myers farm. It had been so dark that she hadn't been able to see what color it was, but it had stuck out to her because as far as she knew, the Myers did not own a minivan. And so hearing this, Whitaker realized, this woman may have seen the killer leaving the property. And if that was true, it meant the murders most likely happened before 4:30 in the morning. And so this was potentially quite useful. And so he thanked the neighbor, and after she left, he went back inside the house to look for more clues. He really wanted to piece together a motive. He felt strongly that whoever had done this knew Linda and Jack, but that doesn't mean that the motive is clear. There could be any number of reasons they would attack them. Maybe it was a robbery. Maybe they were just, getting revenge or something. He didn't know, but As he began walking around the house, he found a literal deposit bag full of cash in the living room, which certainly suggested that this was not a robbery, because that would certainly have been taken. And also, there were some pretty expensive electronics in the living room that also had not been touched, so robbery seemed to be out the door. But when Whitaker went back upstairs to take a closer look at the toddler's bedroom, he noticed something odd. There was a little red stain on the bedding that looked like dried blood. While forensics teams were still combing over the farmhouse, another investigator assigned to the case, a guy named Detective Mike Burns, went to the local preschool to speak to 4-year-old Damien. Burns was a father himself, and he felt an immediate connection to this little boy, who at this point looked scared and very confused. Now, he knew it was going to be very difficult for Damien to rehash something that was so traumatic, but Damien was the only potential witness in the house when his great-grandparents were killed. So speaking to him was the police's best bet at figuring out what happened. And so Burns sat down on the floor with Damien inside of a private room, and he asked him to explain what had happened that morning. Damien, in a 4-year-old way, said he'd woken up around 8:45 and the house had been very quiet, so he'd gotten out of bed and went into his great-grandparents' bedroom. And then he said that both of them had been in bed, and he thought they were sleeping. But when he tried to wake them up, they wouldn't move. And then he realized there was blood on their face, and he said he had tried to wipe the blood off with Kleenex wipes. But there was so much of it that he realized something was very wrong. He thought for a second that their faces were melting. And so, to save his great-grandparents, he had run the full mile down the road to his preschool to get help. Burns was surprised that this 4-year-old could remember and articulate so much about such an awful experience. But he was very grateful because the child's story explained why there was blood on Damien's shirt. However, it did not explain why they'd also found blood on Damien's bed. So he asked Damien if he had gone back into his own room after finding his great-grandparents. But Damien said no. He'd gone straight out the front door and gone to his school. Burns thought there had to be more to the story, though, because otherwise he just couldn't explain how blood wound up in Damien's room. So he brought over a dollhouse, and he asked Damien to go ahead and act out everything that had happened the night before, using toys to represent himself and his great-grandparents. Damien put the toy that represented himself into bed in one room, and then he put Jack and Linda into the bed in the other room. And he said everybody went to sleep at their normal bedtimes. But later, in the middle of the night, he heard his bedroom door open, and he said somebody came inside. Burns asked Damien who it was. And Damien paused, and then he said, "The green monster." At first, Burns wasn't really sure what to make of this. He wondered if Damien was just imagining things or describing a nightmare or something. But then Damien set the toys down, and then to represent this green monster, he used his fingers to crawl across the floor of the dollhouse toward Damien's bed. Damien said he had heard the door open in his room and he had opened his eyes just a little bit, but he didn't want to give away that he was fully awake, so he was just squinting his eyes. And he said when he did that, he saw the green monster right next to his bed. And the green monster was pointing a gun at him. And Damien was so terrified, he said he shut his eyes and just pretended to be asleep. And then he said when he opened his eyes again, the green monster was gone. After hearing this, Burns realized that Damien's recollection was almost certainly not a dream. More likely than not, Damien had come face to face with his grandparents' killer. They were the green monster. After leaving the preschool, the next priority for Detective Burns was to speak to Damien's mother, 19-year-old Amber Holscher. And so the detective drove out to Amber's house, which was in a nearby town, and when he rang the doorbell, she answered right away. Now, at this point, nobody in the family had been notified yet about the murders, so Amber seemed to have no idea why a detective was now standing on her doorstep. Now, Burns knew this, and so he said to her, "Can I please come inside? We need to speak." And so, confused, Amber said okay, and she let him inside, and they sat down in the living room. And then Burns said to her, very gently, that her grandparents, Linda and Jack Myers, were no longer with them. But when Amber heard this, she just looked confused and asked what he meant, like, where are they? So Burns took a deep breath and he clarified that they were deceased. Amber looked completely shocked and immediately asked, "Is Damien dead too?" But Burns said, no, he's alive. but he's going to be kept in protective custody for a while in case whoever killed Jack and Linda try to hurt him too. And until they narrowed down the suspects, Damien would not be allowed to see anybody in the family, including her, his own mother. At this point, Amber just began to cry. Burns felt horrible for her, but really he was thinking about Damien. He knew he had to solve this case as quickly as possible because every day that he didn't would be another day that Damien would have to spend alone without any family to comfort him. Based both on Amber's reaction to the news and the fact that Damien did not mention seeing his mother on the night of the murder, Burns thought it was highly unlikely that Amber was a suspect, but she could know something that might help the investigation. So, once she calmed down, Burns asked her if she knew anyone who might have wanted to hurt her grandparents. And right away, she nodded and she mentioned Damien's father, Andrew Huffman. She said Andrew hated Linda because she wouldn't let him see Damien. In fact, just recently, Andrew had come to Linda's pizza shop and started a fight with her about custody. And it had escalated to the point where Andrew had publicly threatened to kill her. This obviously caught Burns' attention because it made perfect sense as a motive. If Linda and Jack were out of the way, well, Andrew would have an easier time getting custody of Damien. And so he thanked Amber and promised he would be in touch soon. And then as soon as he was back in his car, he called Sergeant Whitaker and he told him what he'd learned. Later that day, Whitaker and his partner made the 2-hour drive to Andrew's address in Newport, Kentucky. When they got there, Andrew quickly came to the door and he let them inside and they sat down and Andrew looked at them like, "What's going on?" And they told him that Linda and Jack had been murdered. And they watched Andrew for his reaction. And he seemed very surprised, but he definitely did not seem upset. Andrew would then admit that he did not get along with Amber's family. And when Whitaker asked him about that big argument at the pizza shop, Andrew did not deny that he had literally threatened to kill Linda. But he swore he would never actually do it. He said it was just an empty threat he made in the heat of the moment. Still, Whitaker thought Andrew looked very suspicious, so he asked him for an alibi. And Andrew said he'd stayed over at a girl's house on the night of the murder, and in the morning he'd stopped by his dad's house and then gone straight to work. And you could ask all those people, and that's where he was. Whitaker wrote all this down and then asked Andrew a few more questions, and then thanked him for his time. And then as soon as the detectives left, they immediately went to go check on Andrew's alibi. They went to that girl's house, then they went to Andrew's dad's house, and then they also went to his place of work, and everybody at those 3 locations all confirmed Andrew's alibi. So unless someone was lying, it left no window of time where Andrew could have driven 2 hours away to Ohio to murder Jack and Linda. Whitaker was disappointed that they basically wasted most of the day on this lead that now looked like it wouldn't go anywhere. Especially knowing that, again, every moment in this case that it went unsolved was another moment that Damien would have to spend away from his family all alone. The following morning, Detective Burns, the same officer who had spoken to Damien and also his mother Amber, sat inside of his office feeling very frustrated. He had one goal for the day. He wanted to interview Jack's estranged son, 28-year-old Travis Myers. But it was looking like that was going to be harder than he had anticipated. So the day before, a bunch of sheriff's deputies had interviewed Linda and Jack's family and friends. And family members in particular had mentioned that Travis and Jack had some bad blood. And when Burns had dug through the files on Travis, he found out that Travis also had a criminal record. But there was a problem. It appeared that Travis hadn't even been in Ohio in 7 years. The last anybody in the family had heard, he'd moved to Arizona to live with his mother. But when Burns had called the mother that morning, she said that she actually didn't know where Travis was at all. And there was no other address on record for Travis, so Burns basically had no idea where he was. And so he began to wonder, how was he going to track Travis down? And he decided he should start by visiting Travis's younger brother and Jack's other son, whose name was Greg. Burns knew Greg lived only a few towns over, and even though he really wasn't sure how close the brothers might be, it was the only lead he really had. A little while later, Burns showed up at Greg's house and he knocked on the front door. And a moment later, a young man in a baseball cap answered, and he looked very much like he'd been crying. Burns asked if he was Greg Myers, and the young man nodded and stepped aside to let him in. Greg did not seem remotely surprised by this visit. He said the police had already contacted him the night before to tell him about his father and stepmother's murder, and since then, he said he'd just been waiting for somebody to come by and talk to him, because he'd seen enough TV to know that family members were always the first suspects. But when they got into the living room, Burns stopped in his tracks because there was another young man standing in the doorway, and he looked a lot like Greg. Burns asked who it was, and Greg said, "Oh, that's my brother, Travis." Burns couldn't believe his luck. He'd come here hoping to figure out where Travis might be, but he never imagined he would just find Travis standing in Greg's house. And this was a big development because really, until now, Burns had no idea if Travis was even in the state at the time of the murders. But Greg would actually tell him that Travis had been in Ohio for the past several weeks, staying in an apartment that he had rented right nearby. Burns did think the timing seemed very suspicious. It just seemed way too convenient that Travis had come back into town for the first time in almost a decade, right before Jack and Linda were killed. It just seemed too perfect. And also at this point, it just seemed really suspicious that these two brothers are just standing here waiting for police to come question them. Something felt off. So Burns, operating on a gut instinct, told them both that in order to question them, they actually had to come with him to the station and do it formally down there. Less than an hour later, Detective Burns opened the door of the Darke County Sheriff's Office, and he showed Greg and Travis Myers inside. Now, neither of the brothers were under arrest yet, but Burns had a feeling that by the end of their interviews, one or both of them could be. Burns took Greg into his office for questioning, while Burns' partner took Travis into a room down the hall. As soon as Greg sat down in front of the desk, Burns noticed that he wasn't making eye contact with him. He was sort of acting shifty. But pretty quickly, Greg said he was perfectly willing to tell the detectives anything they wanted if it could help solve his dad and stepmother's murders. And so Burns immediately began asking questions. He asked Greg what he was doing in the early hours of Thursday morning when Jack and Linda were killed. And Greg told him that mostly he was just asleep. That is, until about 4:30 when he got up to go to his job at a factory that was a few towns over. He also said his girlfriend was at home with him the whole night, and she could confirm that. He then said he drove to work in his minivan, and he clocked in at 5:23 a.m. And he even had a signed time card back home that would prove it. And Burns was immediately very interested to learn that Greg drove a minivan. Because remember, that neighbor had said she saw a minivan leaving the Myers farm around 4:30 on the morning of the murders, suggesting the killer drove a minivan. However, Burns was starting to realize that even if Greg's alibi were shaky or didn't check out, the timing alone likely ruled him out. It basically was impossible to drive from Greg's house at 4:30 a.m. when he left, go all the way to the farm, commit the murders, then drive to the factory and be able to clock in at 5:23 a.m. when he had his time card stamped. That just wasn't enough time to do all that. And also, pretty much everybody in the family had told Burns that Greg was quite close with Jack and Linda. Now, he was having some problems with drugs and alcohol, but he had no history of crime or violence, and none of his family members thought he seemed capable of being a killer. So even though Greg remained a suspect, Burns decided he would shift his focus to Travis. So Burns asked Greg how had Travis reacted when he heard about Jack and Linda's murders. And he said Travis had been upset, but he'd mostly been concerned about how Greg was coping, because Greg was the one who was much closer to Jack and Linda. Travis was estranged. Greg went on to say that it had been at least 7 years since Travis and his father had spoken, and that those two did not get along at all. Burns asked Greg about that falling out between Jack and Travis, and Greg said it just came down to business disagreements on the farm. He said Travis had felt like his father was cheating him out of money, and they had this big argument that got really ugly, so Travis had just quit the business and moved away. Burns thought about this, and he wondered if maybe Travis stood to inherit any money if his father died. Because if so, that would definitely be a solid motive for murder. And so Burns made two mental notes. One was to look into Greg's alibi, and the other was to look into Jack's will to see how his assets were going to be divided up. After that, he thanked Greg for his cooperation, told him to wait in his office, and then Burns left. And he went right down the hall, and he waited outside the door while his partner finished questioning Travis. Burns' partner would say that Travis had seemed really nervous from the very moment he stepped inside the room. The detective had asked him what he was doing in Ohio, and Travis said he'd just been reevaluating his life recently. And he'd realized that he'd never actually met his brother Greg's children, so he'd come back to Ohio to do just that and spend some time with them. Then the detective asked him what he was doing when Jack and Linda were killed, and Travis stuttered out that he was sleeping in his apartment. The detective asked him if he had anybody who could confirm that, and Travis kind of hesitated and then shook his head and said no. Then the detective asked Travis if he had a car, and Travis said that at the moment he was driving his mother's car, a white minivan. After getting debriefed by his partner about this interview with Travis, Burns went back into his office. By this point, Greg had been moved out and put in a different room, and Burns sat down at his desk and he began going over the evidence they'd collected so far. Now, the investigation to this point had been moving really quickly, and so there actually wasn't a whole lot of evidence yet. In fact, it had only been 24 hours since the forensics were sent to the crime lab, so they were still waiting for results on pretty much everything. Burns knew that at this point, the best thing he could do while he waited for more evidence was go follow up on Travis and Greg's alibis. After all, they are the victims' children, and he already thought that the killer had to be connected personally to the victims, and they both drove minivans. So really, either of them could be the killer. But just then, Burns' phone rang. He picked it up, and it was a local man who said he had seen a news report about Jack and Linda's murders, and he had some information that just might help. The man said that a few days earlier, his friend had called him to see if he knew where they could buy a gun. And when this man who's talking to Burns, asked this friend why they needed the gun, the friend said it was because they, quote, wanted to shoot Jack Myers. The man told Burns the name of his friend who said this, and as soon as Burns heard that name, he knew exactly who his murderer was. Based on this phone call, as well as forensic evidence from the crime scene, this is what police believe happened to Jack and Linda Myers on the morning of March 27th, 2003. Early on the morning of the murders, the killer woke up and got out of bed and right away put on a green hunting jumpsuit. And they also packed a bag with duct tape, trash bags, and a roll of masking tape. Then they put on a pair of latex gloves and loaded the 12-gauge shotgun that they had purchased from a classified ad 2 days earlier, and they carried all their supplies out to their minivan. After they were ready, they hopped in the driver's seat, turned on the car, and then drove a familiar route through the dark open fields. They were calm at first, until they turned onto the gravel road that led to Jack and Linda's farm. At that point, their heart began to race. Now, the killer felt like they had planned all of this out and prepared for anything that could go wrong. So now really all they had to do was just control themselves and just stick to the plan. And so the killer parked right outside the farmhouse, and then while staying in the car, they climbed into the back seat of the minivan and they grabbed their shotgun. Then they grabbed this thick quilting fabric and they wrapped it around the barrel of the shotgun, and they used masking tape to secure it. That was their DIY silencer. But as they went through this plan, the killer's hands were shaking. They were nervous because as much as they had planned for this, it really was not something they actually wanted to do, but they felt like they had to. So after their gun had its silencer on it, they slung it over their shoulder, then they got out of the van and crept around to the side of the house. And once they were there, they cut the phone lines so nobody inside would be able to call for help. Then they knelt down in the dirt and they pried open the basement window and they climbed inside. Once inside, the killer walked to the stairs, they went up to the first floor, and they walked straight to the bedroom where they knew Jack and Linda would be asleep. They went inside, and there they were, sleeping in their beds, and the killer took a deep breath and then raised their shotgun, and they fired a single round into the back of Jack's neck. But the force of the gunshot had blasted off the homemade silencer, and so basically it wasn't silent at all. It was extremely loud, and that homemade silencer landed on the pillow right next to Jack's head. And almost immediately, from the chaos, Linda sat up and she looked straight at the killer and she saw what was happening and she just raised a hand to try to defend herself. And in a moment of panic, the killer just turned the shotgun on her and they fired twice. And one blast went through her hand and the other struck her right in the face. At this point, the killer just paused and waited. The silencer had sort of muffled the first shot, but the second two were so loud, they knew that noise easily could have woken up the third person who they knew was in this house, someone they really didn't want to hurt. But if they had to, they would. So, just to make sure they didn't have any loose ends, they left Linda and Jack's bedroom, confident they were dead, and they crept upstairs to little Damien's room. And they went inside, and they carefully walked over right next to the boy's bed, and they raised their shotgun and aimed it at this child, waiting to see if they were awake. But the little boy appeared to be asleep, and so the killer spared him. They lowered their shotgun and they walked out of the room. Once they were out in the hallway, they shut Damien's door and then hurried right out of the house. And from there, they got back in their minivan and they sped off. A few miles away, they stopped on a bridge and tossed their gun, their supplies, and their clothes into a river, and then they changed into their work clothes and they drove to the factory, where they would clock in at precisely 5:23 a.m. The killer was Jack's younger son, Greg Myers. Greg had been having problems with money and drug abuse, and his father, Jack, had refused to help him, and they were fighting about it. But Greg knew he would inherit the farm if his father died, and he was so desperate, he decided murder was his best option. When police timed the drive from Jack and Linda's farm to Greg's workplace, they found that he would have actually had just enough time to commit the horrible double murder and then drive straight to work and clock in by 5:23. Greg was ultimately arrested about 48 hours after the crime, so quickly that police were actually still gathering evidence to use against him. They later found the gun, other supplies, and shoes that matched the prints found outside the house in a river right near the farm. And fingerprints and receipts tied all the items back to Greg. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. As for Damien, following the murders, he would go to live with his mother Amber. Despite everything he witnessed at just 4 years old, Amber said in a 2021 documentary that he is now doing very well. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. So click here and give them a watch. All right, until next time, see ya. The final confession at the end of this video is genuinely horrifying. Viewer discretion is advised. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3 or 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please secretly teach the like button's parrot to screech obscenities every time the like button is on a work call. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. On September 12, 1982, 2 off-duty Alaska police officers were off hunting in a very remote section of Alaska about 20 miles away from Anchorage. The only way to get out to this area was by plane or by boat, and so generally speaking, the only people that came into this area were big-time hunters. After a long day, the 2 men realized it was starting to get dark and they were still deep in the woods, and so they decided it was time to turn around and start heading back to camp. The journey through the woods was challenging, and so the men walked down to the nearby Kinnick River and walked across an exposed sandbar. And as they walked, they noticed up ahead there was a boot sticking out of the sand. And as they got closer, they realized it wasn't just a boot. There was also a human leg bone still in the boot. Being police officers, they knew the importance of not disturbing a potential crime scene, and so instead they marked on the map where they were, they left the area, and they reported the body to their department. The following day, crime scene technicians came out to that remote area and they very carefully unearthed the remains, which still had women's clothing on them. And then afterwards, they began searching for evidence in the area, and eventually they discovered a single shell casing that was a .223 caliber round, which is a common caliber for hunting rifles. The remains were sent back to the lab for an autopsy, and it was revealed this person was a female and she had most likely died at least 6 months earlier. And she had almost certainly been the victim of a homicide because she had died from 3 gunshot wounds. Also during the autopsy, it was discovered that there were no bullet holes on any of her clothing, and so it appeared that she had been shot without her clothes on, and then her killer presumably redressed her. Also, they found a hospital bandage wrapped up in her clothing that appeared to have been wrapped around her head, leading some to speculate that she had been blindfolded before she was shot. A couple of weeks after the autopsy, dental records came back and they identified the body as belonging to 23-year-old Sherry Morrow. Sherry was an exotic dancer from Anchorage who had been reported missing 10 months earlier. In her missing persons report, it was stated that the last thing she told her friends was she had been offered $300 to have pictures taken of her by a professional photographer, and she was going to meet this man right before she disappeared. While police were fairly certain that Sherry's killer was this so-called photographer, They had no evidence that would allow them to search for this person. They had nothing. All they had was this shell casing that was commonly used amongst hunters. And there's lots of hunters in Alaska. So the police reported the finding of Sherry's body to the media in hopes that when they put that out to the world, that someone from the public would reach out with more information. During the police's press conference, one of the reporters asked them, do you think Sherry's death is connected to the other unsolved deaths in that part of Alaska? What they were referencing was 2 years earlier, 2 other women's bodies had been discovered in that rough area where Sherry had been found. One of the women was so badly decomposed there was no way to identify her. However, it was revealed she was probably in her late teens or early 20s. The other woman was able to be identified. It was 24-year-old Joanne Messina, who was an exotic dancer from Anchorage. But there was virtually no evidence at either of the 2 women's grave sites, and so their deaths remained a mystery. Publicly, at this press conference, the police told reporters that they did not believe Sherry's death was connected to those 2 other women. But privately, some officers had their suspicions. Not only had these 3 women met similar fates in a similar area, but over the past couple of years, there had been a significant increase in missing people out of Anchorage, Alaska. And most of these missing people were young women that were either exotic dancers or prostitutes. This convinced many officers that they were dealing with a serial killer, but there just wasn't any evidence to actually prove it, so they couldn't come out and say it publicly. Over the following year, no new information came out about Sherry Morrow or the other 2 deceased women that had been found in that same area, and so all 3 of their cases just continued to languish. Meanwhile, more and more exotic dancers and prostitutes were going missing out of Anchorage, and no one knew why. Then, on June 13th, 1983, the police got a break. Early that morning, a man driving a truck turned onto a quiet Anchorage highway, and as he was making his way down the road, he saw up ahead on the side, there was this woman running towards him, screaming with her hands over her head, and she wasn't wearing pants or shoes. And so obviously he knew something was wrong, and so he pulled over, and as this woman is charging up towards him, he notices she has a handcuff on one of her wrists, and she appears to be a lot younger than he initially thought. She's probably in her late teens. And so she comes running up to his car. He unlocks the passenger side door. She flings herself inside without even asking for permission. She slams the door behind her and then ducks down to keep her head out of the window like she's trying to hide from something out there. Now, this man looked out and he didn't see anyone or anything, but he wasn't going to wait around for whatever it was she was scared of. And so he just made a gut decision to take this girl away from here. And so he peeled off and drove down the road. And the girl, who was very shaken up, couldn't even tell this guy what was going on. She just asked him to please drop her off at a nearby motel. And the man didn't ask any questions. He drove her to the motel and he dropped her off. The girl ran inside and up to her room. And when she ran inside, the motel receptionist sees this girl running in. I mean, she doesn't have her pants on. She's got a handcuff on. She looks terrified. And so she called the police. A few minutes later, the police showed up. They went up to this girl's room. They knocked on the door. The girl opened it up and she was obviously very scared, and she allowed the police inside, and she told them her name was Cindy Paulson and she was 17 years old. The police recognized this girl is terrified. She's not a threat. And so they removed the one handcuff that was still on her. And then they asked her, what happened? And the police officers would say her story was just horrible. But what stood out to them was not how disturbing the story was. It was how composed and brave this girl was as she told it. This is her story. The night before, Cindy was working the streets of Anchorage. She was a prostitute, and a car pulled up, and inside was this wiry, bearded guy with glasses who seemed kind of slight and harmless, and he asked to buy her services. And because she didn't view him as a threat, she agreed and hopped in his passenger seat, and as soon as she sat down, he reached over and put a handcuff on one wrist and then drew a gun on her and told her to be quiet. And then he drove her to this fairly nice neighborhood, pulled into a driveway, he got her out of the car and led her into this house, and he brought her along downstairs into the basement, where as soon as she got down there was a dim light and she saw there was a chain swinging from the ceiling. And he strung her up onto that chain, and for hours he assaulted her. And then after he grew tired of doing that, he told her he was going to go take a nap, and when he came back, they were going to leave this house and go out to his cabin in the woods. At this point, she begged him to let her go, but he really didn't care. He just told her that if she made any noise or tried to escape at any point, he would have to kill her. and then he walked out of the room. And for the next several hours, Cindy remained chained to the ceiling with half of her clothes off, wondering what horrible thing was going to happen to her next. Eventually, her attacker came back in the room, and he untied her from her chain, and he walked her upstairs to his living room, where he very proudly showed her a number of hunting trophies he had, and he began telling her about how much he loved hunting and where he went hunting. And it was at this point that Cindy realized this guy has no intention of keeping her alive. He's shown her his face, his house, his car. He's told her about places he likes to go and things he likes to do. He's given her all this information about himself. She is a huge liability to him. And so it dawned on her that if she didn't find a way to escape, she was going to die. After the trophy tour, the man led Cindy back out to her car, he put her inside, and then he drove to a nearby small airport where he said his plane was. And so he pulled over to their hangar, he got her out of the car, and he put her inside of the plane. And as Cindy is sitting in the plane, she's watching this guy load gun after gun and bag after bag of what looks like military supplies into this plane. And so she knows that this is the moment. I have to escape right now, because as soon as this plane takes off, I'm done for. And so at some point when this guy went over to his car to get something and his back was turned to her, she jumped out of the cockpit of this plane, she fell to the ground, she got up and just began running out of the hangar. And she managed to get out of the hangar and began turning the corner and running towards this forest right as she hears this guy charging after her, screaming that he's going to catch her and kill her. And so she just keeps running for her life all the way into this forest, all the way to that highway, before she finally stopped and turned around and she saw the man had stopped following her. This is when she went onto the highway and she flagged down the guy in the truck who brought her to the motel. The police were shocked by her story. It sounded totally unbelievable, but she was so genuinely scared and so detailed that they believed her. And so they told her they would have to bring her to the hospital, and on their way to the hospital, she demanded they go back to that airport that she had been held at so she can try to identify the hangar she had been in, and hopefully the plane would still be in there. And so the police comply, they go into the airport, and Cindy points out the hangar she believes she was in. And when they get there, the plane she had been on was still there, but the man, her attacker, was not there. And so the police got out and they began taking down notes about the plane, its different tag numbers and what it looked like. And while they're standing there, the security guard from the airport came over because he saw the police cars, and he told the officers that the night before he had seen the owner of the plane they're looking at acting very suspiciously with something inside of his car. And so on a hunch, he had recorded that man's license plate number, and he gave that number to police. And so the police were able to use that license plate number and some of the numbers on the plane to figure out who owned both vehicles. And it was a local man named Robert Hansen who owned a very successful bakery downtown. After dropping Cindy off at the hospital, the police officers decided to pay a visit to Robert Hansen at his house. When they got there, Robert was actually pulling into his driveway right at the same time, and they saw his car matched the description that Cindy had given of his car. And then when Robert got out of his car, he matched the description that Cindy had given of her attacker. When Robert saw the police parked outside of his house, he immediately invited them over and said, what can I help you with? And the police said, we'd like to talk to you. Can we go inside? Robert invited them inside, and when the police went into his house, it matched the description that Cindy had given of his house with all the hunting trophies everywhere. And so they sat down and they asked him what he was doing the night before, and he said he had spent the night with some friends, and he had their contact information, and if you needed to talk to them, you could, but they would say he was with them. When the police asked if they could have a look around his property, Robert immediately consented and said, you can look anywhere you want. And so the police searched his property, but found no signs that Cindy had been attacked there. And so they thanked him for his hospitality and they left. Once they got back to their station, they checked in with Robert's two friends he claimed he was with the night before, and they each independently corroborated Robert's story, saying that yes, he was with them from this time to this time. And so it appeared, as unlikely as it seemed, that Robert was telling the truth. And so the police went back to Cindy and they said, are you sure that everything you told us is exactly as you remember it? You didn't exaggerate anything? This is the truth? And Cindy said, absolutely. And they said, okay, well, are you prepared to take a lie detector test to prove that you're telling the truth? And Cindy said, no. Now, it's unclear why she said no. Maybe it was a general distrust of the police, but either way, when she said no, it immediately cast an enormous amount of doubt on her story in the eyes of the police. And when Cindy started to pick up that the police really didn't believe her anymore, she got spooked and just left town. And after that, her case and Robert Hansen were largely forgotten about. But 3 months later, on September 2nd, all of that changed. On that day, a construction crew was doing some work on a backcountry road not far from where those 3 women's bodies had been found. And at some point, one of their machines uncovered some human remains. The police were called in, who pulled up the rest of the remains, and then just like in Sherry Morrow's case, when they looked for evidence around this new body, they found a single shell casing from a .223 caliber round. The remains were brought back for an autopsy, where it was determined that the body was female and she had died from several gunshot wounds. Using dental records, they were able to identify this woman as being 17-year-old Paula Goulding, who was an exotic dancer who had gone missing 5 months prior from Anchorage. The police sent the .223 shell casing found in Paula's gravesite, along with the other .223 shell casing found in Sherry Morrow's gravesite, to a lab to be analyzed. And it was quickly determined that both of these rounds had been fired from the same rifle, and therefore both women had most likely been killed by the same person. This was the moment the police knew they were dealing with a serial killer, and many police officers wanted it to be Robert Hansen. He seemed like the guy, but he had a rock-solid alibi and they had no hard evidence against him. And so without any other suspects, the police turned to a famous FBI profiler, a guy by the name of John Douglas, and they asked him to build a profile of who he think killed Sherry Morrow and Paula Goulding. And when John's report came back, the police were shocked. The profile described a man in his 40s who blended in easily with society. He was well-liked and got along with people and was just a normal guy. And he was successful, probably because he owned a successful business. He was an avid outdoorsman and hunter, and he most likely had a significant speech defect, like a lisp or a stutter. The profile was perfectly describing Robert Hansen. And because of John Douglas's prolific success in correctly identifying killers based on his profiles, when a judge saw this particular profile and saw how neatly it lined up with Robert Hansen, he gave the FBI a search warrant for Robert's house. And this time they would find very damning evidence, like a map of the local area. It was a hunting map, and on it there were 37 X's marked off. And some of those X's coincided with the same area where those 4 women's bodies had been found. They also found a .223 caliber rifle, along with a bag of women's jewelry that contained a necklace belonging to Sherry Morrow. As the FBI was carrying evidence out of Robert's house into their truck, a neighbor walked over after seeing all the commotion, and she walked up to one of the agents, and she was very skittish and anxious, and she said, my husband, he's friends with Robert, and he recently pretended to be an alibi for Robert. He had no idea how much trouble he was in, and I certainly didn't know, but I want you guys to know that my husband was lying. He was not with Robert on the night that he said he was. This was the proverbial nail in the coffin for Robert Hansen, because now, without this alibi, he had nothing to hide behind. And so when the police approached Robert with their overwhelming evidence against him between what they found in his house and this now recanted statement from his former alibi, Robert said, okay, I'm going to confess. But there was a catch. He was only willing to confess to murdering the 4 women whose bodies had already been found by police. Now, the police knew Robert had almost definitely killed more people, and so at this point, they just wanted to know who the other victims were and where they were. And so they offered Robert a deal where he would confess to those 4 murders and then give additional information about other victims, where they were located, who they were, what happened to them. In exchange, they would not prosecute him on any other victims he named. And so Robert agreed to these terms, he signed the deal, and then he gave a full, horrifying confession. He said he would drive around Anchorage at night and look for young, vulnerable women that were all alone. These were usually prostitutes out on the street, or they were exotic dancers he would try to befriend inside of clubs. And when he approached these women, he would tell them he was a professional photographer and he thought they were beautiful and he wanted to take photos of them, and he would pay them for the photo shoot. And many of these women were aspiring models, and they were really excited at this idea, and so they would agree to go. And so Robert would tell them to meet him the next day at a particular location, which was usually a fast food restaurant, and Robert would show up much earlier and he would hide in his car, and he would wait to see when they showed up if they were alone or not. And when he saw they were alone and they had no one to help them, he would drive up and he would ask them to get in his car. What these women couldn't see was on the inside of the passenger side door was a handcuff that was already latched on to the door itself, and there was an open cuff waiting for them as soon as they got in. They would get in the car, he would reach over them and act like he was helping them put on their seatbelt, and then as they're kind of looking at him, wondering what he's doing, he would grab their wrist, throw it in the open handcuff, and then he would draw a pistol and hold it against their head and say, "Be quiet." During his confession, Robert bragged to police that he had done this so many times, putting the handcuff on and drawing the pistol, that it was like muscle memory for him. Once he had the women handcuffed inside of his car, he would drive them back to his house and he would bring them into his basement and he would chain them up to the ceiling just like Cindy had described. And then after assaulting them for hours, he would take them out of his basement, put them in his car, drive out to the airport. He would put them in his plane, but unlike Cindy, these women didn't escape. And he would take off and he would fly them out to his cabin, which was not far from where those 4 bodies had been found. Once he got the women into his cabin, he would undress them and put a blindfold on them, and then with their handcuffs still on, he would assist them out the front door and tell them to run. And they would take off as fast as they could into the woods, running into trees, falling over, but just running for their lives, believing their ordeal was now over. They just had to get away from this guy. But what they didn't know is their ordeal was just starting. Robert had no intention of allowing them to escape. He knew there was deep water that surrounded his cabin, and so if they actually made it that far to the water's edge, they would drown. And so Robert would give these women a significant head start to give them the sense that they actually might escape. And then Robert would grab his knife and his hunting rifle, and he would head out and begin stalking his prey. And for the next several hours or days, he would walk around the woods looking for these women, and he would just stay off, watching what they were doing. And at some point, he would sneak up on them, and he would wound them intentionally, usually with his knife, and then he had a blood trail to follow. And he would follow these dying women who were screaming out for help, and at some point, these women would know they were going to die. There was no hope for them, and they would collapse or they would stop, and at that point, Robert would walk up to them, and he would shoot them. Afterwards, he would remove their handcuffs, he would redress them, and then he would bury them in a shallow grave. Before he was carted off to prison to serve a life sentence without the possibility of parole, he was brought out by authorities to help identify where other grave sites were in that hunting area. But he was only able to find 8 additional victims because he would go to different grave sites and the remains would not be there anymore, most likely because animals had ransacked the area, or he just simply forgot where it was, or he didn't want to share any more information with police. Robert never confirmed if all 37 of those X's on that map that was found are actual sites of victims that he buried. But investigators say that's exactly what they were, and in fact, many believe there are other maps with more X's on them. But the police could only confirm 17 victims. If there were more, we probably will never know, because in 2014, Robert died in prison and he took those secrets to the grave. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and where you found it. So give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we will pin you at the top of the comments section. If you got something out of today's video and you haven't done this already, please secretly teach the like button's parrot to scream obscenities every time the like button is on a work call. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 3 or 4 video uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. I also have a second YouTube channel called MrBallen Shorts where I post random short videos and lost episodes. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya. Today's story was all over the news a couple of years ago, but there was a mind-blowing detail about this story that very few news outlets chose to report. And so today's story will end with that detail. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload 2 or 3 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please ask the like button to hold your very easily startled cat, and then once they do, press the test button on your smoke detector. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. On April 17th, 2018, 42-year-old Holly Mackey sat down in aisle seat 14C on a Southwest Airlines plane. That morning, she, along with 143 other passengers and the 5 crew members, would be flying from New York City to Dallas, Texas. And then after that 4-hour flight, Holly would get off that plane and board another plane from Dallas to Oklahoma City, where she lived. But luckily that flight was only about an hour long. After Holly buckled her lap belt, she put her carry-on bag under the seat in front of her, and then she waited to see who was going to be sitting in the 2 seats to her left. A few seconds later, a 43-year-old bank executive and mother of 2 named Jennifer Reardon came walking down the aisle and stopped right outside of row 14 and turned into the aisle towards Holly. And Holly, who was kind of keeping her head down, she noticed there was this person standing outside of her aisle, and so she turned and looked up, and looking down at her was this big bright smile, and Jennifer said to her, "Hey, can I sit next to you? Is anybody using those seats?" And Holly would say, "Nope, I'm here by myself, go right ahead." Unlike other airlines that would assign seats to all of their passengers before they boarded, Southwest Airlines has an open seating plan. What they do is they basically group passengers into boarding groups, but then once that group is on the plane, it's first come, first serve. After Jennifer slid past Holly and made her way to the window seat where she sat down, which was seat 14A, she buckled her lap belt, and then just like Holly, she took her carry-on bag and stuffed it under the seat in front of her, and then she pulled a paperback book out of her bag and started reading it. For the next few minutes, as more and more passengers came onto the plane, nobody took the seat between Holly and Jennifer, because generally speaking, people don't like riding in the middle seat if there is a window or aisle seat available, because it's just not very comfortable sitting between 2 people for hours at a time. But eventually, the only seats left were middle seats. And at some point, this preteen girl who had her head buried in her phone, she comes onto the plane and she works her way down and she stops outside of row 14 and she very politely asks Holly if she can sit between her and Jennifer. And Holly says, absolutely. And so this girl slips past Holly and she sits down in seat 14B. She puts her lap belt on, she takes her carry-on, puts it under the seat in front of her, and then she just goes back to looking at her phone. Now that all of Holly's seatmates had arrived and she would not need to be getting out of the way for more people to come into a row, Holly kind of relaxed for a minute and she pulled out her iPad and she began scanning through the news as she waited for the plane to finish boarding. After all the passengers had been seated, one of the flight attendants closed the airplane door and then they grabbed the microphone and welcomed everyone aboard the plane and thanked them for choosing Southwest Airlines. And then they reminded everyone on board to make sure their seatbelt was fastened, that their tray was in the upright position, that their seat was upright as well, that they'd stowed big electronics. And then with the help of several other flight attendants, they went over some basic safety procedures in case of a mid-air emergency. Most of the passengers on this flight were really not paying attention to the safety brief. They were trying to sleep, or they were stowing their stuff, or they were sending one last text message. But Holly, on the other hand, she was paying careful attention. Now, this wasn't totally unusual for her. She was generally safety conscious, but for some reason on this flight, she just had a sense that something bad was about to happen. There was this deep sense of foreboding that she normally didn't feel on flights. And so she found herself really carefully paying attention to these procedures in case something did go wrong. After the brief was over, the attendant who was holding the microphone thanked everyone for listening and then said, "Sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight." But Holly couldn't do that. Because one, she really did have this weird sense that something was off about this flight, that something bad was going to happen, and she just didn't know why. And then number two, she remembered that she had drank this huge cup of iced coffee before she boarded the plane, and so now she really had to use the bathroom. But the plane had already begun taxiing over to the runway, and an attendant had told her she had to sit down. You can't go to the bathroom now, you gotta wait until we're up in the air. And so Holly, who was now feeling very mentally and physically uncomfortable, found herself kind of anxiously looking to her left out the window as the plane continued to taxi to the top of the runway. And then once the plane was set, it paused for a second, and then the engines fired, and Holly and the girl next to her and Jennifer all got sucked back into their seat as the plane began hurtling down the track. And so Holly, the girl, and Jennifer, they're all turned, they're looking out the window as the plane is just bombing straight ahead. They're watching the airport kind of disappear out of view, and then they feel the plane begin to get lift, and then they take off. As the plane rapidly ascended, Holly turned away from the window and just sat back and closed her eyes and was just picturing that moment when they reached their cruising altitude, and she would hear that chime in the cabin, and then the captain would come on the intercom and say, "We've reached our cruising altitude, it's now safe to get up and walk around," at which point Holly was going to run to the bathroom. And so when the plane finally got to a point where Holly felt like they were starting to level out, they probably were going to be at their cruising altitude soon, Holly preemptively undid her seatbelt and turned to face the aisle, getting ready for that chime in the cabin so she could get to the bathroom as soon as possible. But that chime didn't happen. Instead, when they reached their cruising altitude, the captain came on the intercom and she would tell everyone that they had reached their cruising altitude, but no one can leave their seats yet. They were expecting some fairly rough air, some turbulence. And so Holly was totally frustrated and disappointed, and she let out this audible grunt out of frustration. And Jennifer, who had her head in her book, she hears this grunt and she turns to look at Holly to make sure she's okay. And at the exact same time, Holly found herself kind of looking down and turning towards the window to look out the window, and she made eye contact with Jennifer. And immediately Holly recognized that Jennifer thought something was wrong with her, and she was kind of looking at her to make sure she was okay. And Holly just goes, "I really have to go to the bathroom." And so at this, the two women kind of laughed about Holly's plight because it was kind of funny that she desperately needed to go but wasn't allowed to. And so eventually Jennifer just said, "I'm sure they'll let you go soon." And then Jennifer went back to her book, and Holly went back to anxiously waiting to use the bathroom. And the girl sitting between them did not care at all. She was not listening to them. She didn't care. She had her head buried in her phone. After several minutes, Holly started to worry that it might be a while before she was allowed to get up and move around, because she's looking at the flight attendants and they're all buckled into their jump seats and they were hitting some turbulence. And so Holly's thinking, okay, I got to do something to take my mind off of this discomfort. Not only the physical discomfort of needing to use the bathroom, but also that strange foreboding. It just was not going away. And she didn't know what it was, but she just had the sense that something bad was going to happen. And so Holly decided she would do some work. And so at 11:04 a.m. Eastern, she reached down below the seat in front of her and began fishing around in her bag for her laptop. Before she could grab it, she heard two deafeningly loud sounds in rapid succession. The first was a popping sound that came from outside of the plane near the left wing. And the left wing was right outside of their window. And then she heard this whooshing sound that went through the entire cabin. It was like a high-powered vacuum. And then the entire cabin became freezing cold as the plane banked hard to the left. After all this happened, in this fraction of a second, Holly sat up, and it was like she was immediately in shock. She's looking out across the other seats, and she sees all those oxygen masks have deployed from the ceiling. People are screaming, the attendants are running up and down the aisle trying to help people put their masks on as the plane is hard banking to the left, and Holly just kind of robotically reaches out and grabs the mask right in front of her, and she tries to put it on, but despite having listened intently to the safety brief, it was like her hands didn't work, and she couldn't get the band to extend long enough to put it over her head. And so she's fumbling with this mask, still in shock. She can't believe this is actually happening. This is how she's gonna die. And then it's like she snaps out of it, and she forgets about the mask, and she turns left to make sure the girl and Jennifer were okay. And what she saw was absolutely horrifying. That popping sound she heard outside of the plane was the sound of the engine underneath the left wing exploding. And when it detonated, the cowling, which is the outside of the engine, it kind of protects the engine, it broke apart. And one of the pieces of this cowling flew and hit the side of the aircraft, and it struck the window of row 14, Holly's row. And when it did that, it shattered the window completely, causing an explosive decompression of the cabin. When even a small hole opens up in a plane flying miles above the earth, that hole will create hurricane-like forces inside of the cabin. And so anything that is not completely anchored down, including people, will get sucked out of that hole. And in this case, that's what happened. When that window broke open, Jennifer, who was sitting closest to it, was immediately sucked through the window. Now, she was not completely ejected because her seatbelt kept her from going completely out the window, but her entire upper half was now wedged outside of the plane. As for the girl sitting next to Jennifer, in between Jennifer and Holly, she was still getting pulled towards the window because Jennifer, even though she had been pulled out, there was still segments of the window that were open. And so there was still suction towards the window. And so Holly instinctively reached over and grabbed this girl and pulled her in tight to her chest. And then with her left arm, she reached behind the girl and grabbed the belt of Jennifer. And she tried to pull Jennifer back into the plane, but she could tell there was no way she could pull her back. The forces pulling Jennifer out of the plane were far too strong. Holly remembers thinking, someone is going to know this is happening. There's got to be a sensor or something. The flight crew has got to be aware that a person is getting pulled out of the plane. But in reality, the captain and the flight crew, they were aware that the left engine had blown up. That was the thing they were actively trying to combat, to try to keep the plane from crashing. But they had no idea about the drama that was unfolding in row 14. And so Holly is holding on to Jennifer, she's holding on to this girl, and she's screaming out for anybody in the plane to please take notice of the fact that Jennifer is stuck out of the plane. But the sound that was being created by this open window was deafening. Nobody could hear anybody else in this plane. Not to mention, the plane is banking hard to the left, and everybody on board believes they're about to die. So no one is looking around, taking stock of what's going on and assessing what to do next. Everybody's in survival mode and is basically just focused on themselves. And so despite Holly yelling out and trying to wave to people, it was worthless. Jennifer was just stuck out the window and no help was coming. And so for several minutes, Holly is just holding on to Jennifer. She's holding on to this girl. She's screaming out for help, but no one's hearing her. And then eventually, as the plane began to come back from its bank, and it seemed like the pilot was taking control of the craft, even though it was deafening inside and it was still terrifying, people began to open up their blinders a little bit and they started to look around, and some people sitting in the vicinity of row 14, they noticed what was going on with Jennifer and they began yelling and waving for the flight attendants. But again, the sound from this window was deafening. There was just no way the attendants could hear them. And even though everyone's waving at the attendants are very preoccupied. They're dealing with the people right in front of them who are all very worried and concerned. They're trying to talk to the captain about what they need to do next. And so they did not see there was this emergency happening. And so for several more minutes, Jennifer is just stuck out the window with nobody helping her. And it was during this time, as Holly is holding on to her waist and she's holding on to the girl, that Holly is thinking, Jennifer, she's been stuck outside the plane where there's no oxygen for almost 10 minutes. Nobody can survive that. And Jennifer has been forced through this window that's not big enough to have a person fit through it. And so Holly found herself moving her left hand that was gripping onto Jennifer's waist. She just let go of it, not because she was trying to let go of Jennifer. Frankly, her hand was not keeping Jennifer from going anywhere. It was just kind of habitual that she was holding on to her waist. So she takes her hand off of her waist and she just places it right in the center of Jennifer's back. Like she was comforting Jennifer. She was showing Jennifer that you're not alone. We can't help you, but you're not alone. And the woman in row 15, an older woman, she saw Holly do this and she reached across and she put her hand on Holly's back. It was like everybody knew this is a total crisis, but there's just nothing we can do, even if it's killing Jennifer. Despite the damage to the left engine from it exploding, the captain, Tammy Jo Schultz, who was a longtime veteran of the airline, she was able to combat this hard bank to the left and she regained control of the plane, at which point, through the intercom, she was able to bark out orders that were loud enough for the flight attendants to actually hear what was going on, and they were instructed to get up and walk down the aisles and make sure the passengers are okay. And this is when the crew spotted Jennifer. They acted quickly and rushed over and they grabbed Holly and the girl next to her and they safely got them out of that row and moved them to a different row. And then once they were gone, two men named Andrew and Tim, they volunteered to go in row 14 and pull Jennifer back into the plane. They knew the risks. They pull her in, there is still an opening in this plane, and they could very easily just get sucked out themselves. But they didn't care. They knew they needed to help this woman. And so without any hesitation, the two men walked into row 14, they got in position, and with all their might, they were able to pull Jennifer in, they got her into the aisle, and then the two men were able to leave row 14 without being sucked out. And so Jennifer is laying in the aisle, and a passenger who happened to be a nurse, who was named Peggy, she rushed over and she began performing CPR. At this point, Holly remembers looking around the cabin and seeing that everybody was just perfectly still. It was still deafeningly loud inside of the cabin because this window is still sucking air out. So it's very, very loud, but she's looking out and there was just this aura of calm inside the plane. No one was running around. No one was panicking. Everyone was just kind of sitting, watching as Peggy was trying to save Jennifer's life. At 11:21 a.m., so 17 minutes after that pop was heard outside of the plane, the captain of this plane is able to successfully perform an emergency landing at an airport in Philadelphia. And as soon as they touched down on the runway, the captain had already coordinated with a medical team who was standing by, and they rushed on, they grabbed Jennifer, they rushed her out, they got her to the hospital, but unfortunately she didn't make it. She died from blunt force trauma from having been forced out of that window. It was just too small, and it happened too suddenly, and it killed her. Holly was obviously very shaken up by this experience, just like the rest of the passengers who were on board. But there's a detail in Holly's story that makes her experience even more traumatic. On the morning she got on this plane, she arrived at the airport fairly early, she had a big coffee with her, and she got in line for security. So as she's going through this line, she's drinking this huge coffee, and then when it's her turn to actually go through the scanners, she finishes this coffee, she throws it away, she goes through security, and by the time she's on the other side, she's now late. And so she runs all the way to her gate, and when she boards, her boarding group has already gotten on. And so all the seats that she liked to take, those were already gone. She liked to sit towards the front of the plane because she liked to be one of the people that got off the plane first once they landed. And so she began looking for the first open row that she could sit in. And so she starts walking down the row and she finally gets to row 14. She's looking on her left and there's a totally open row, 3 open seats. And so like she always did on long flights, she took the window seat, seat 14A, because she could lean her head up against the side of the plane and sleep. And so after she buckled herself in and put her luggage underneath the seat in front of her, she remembered she had just drank that huge cup of coffee while she was going through security. And even though she didn't have to go to the bathroom right then, she expected to probably have to go a couple of times once they took off. And so not wanting to disrupt the 2 people that were inevitably going to take the 2 seats next to her by constantly all flight long getting up and sneaking past them to go to the bathroom over and over again, Holly decides, you know what, I'll just move. I will sit in the aisle seat. It's not as good because I can't sleep, but at least this way I can get up and use the bathroom without disrupting the people I'm sitting near. And so she unbuckles herself, she reaches down, she grabs her bag from underneath the chair in front of her, she stands up and she moves 2 seats over to the aisle seat of row 14. She sits down, she puts her seatbelt on, she puts her luggage under the seat in front of her there, and then as she's kind of getting herself situated, she sees someone has stopped right outside of row 14. And so she turns, and looking down at her is the smiling face of Jennifer Reardon. And she says, hi, is anybody sitting next to you? Can I sit next to you? And Holly says, absolutely. And Jennifer sneaks past her and sits in the window seat. So that's going to do it, guys. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please ask the like button to hold your easily startled cat. And then once they're doing that, press the test button on your smoke detector. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 2 or 3 video uploads. We are now selling merchandise like flannels and hats and mugs and sweatshirts and all sorts of stuff. If you're interested, go to shopmrballen.com. If you want to learn about upcoming deals and promotions for our merchandise, go to our shop's Instagram page. The username is shopmrballen. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's johnballen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. We also have a second YouTube channel called MrBallen Shorts where we post random short videos and lost episodes. We also have a Facebook page called MrBallen where we post condensed versions of the long episodes you see on YouTube. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya. All right. Welcome to the Balloween stream. I hope you guys are doing well. Let's go ahead and kick it off by show me where you're tuning in from. I have the screen right in front of me. I can see the chat. It's sort of flying right now, but I want to see where people are coming in from. I'm out on the East Coast of the U.S. where it is storming like mad, which feels very apropos for a Balloween stream. Oh my gosh, this chat is soaring. All right, let's see. Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Arkansas, Texas, California, Finland, Philippines, Morristown, Texas, Poland, France. My goodness. Quincy, Mass. I saw somebody from Quincy, Mass. That's my hometown. Shout out Quincy. Wow, there is We are really an international community. That's pretty cool. Before the stream started, I'm a little out of focus. Yeah, I keep shifting back and forth. Is that going to matter? Making sure I'm dialed in. Sweet. I'm probably going to move again. So. I think you're. Okay. Cool. Before this started, the team and I were just talking about how it's so interesting that there are so many people from around the world that are fans of the strange, dark, and mysterious. In the sense that, you know, we come to the studio, we film our YouTube videos and our podcasts, and we do all this stuff, and then we we upload it to the internet. And even though I am definitely, you know, logically aware that people all over the world are getting it, it's always sort of mind-blowing, especially like in live streams and then certainly during live in-person events, to just see that it's not just going into the ether, the content. It's going all over the world. People are just, you know, fans of the strange, dark, and mysterious, which is really cool. But anyways, it's now been 2 minutes. We're going to probably chat for a couple more minutes before we get into the meat and potatoes of this live stream. I got a really good story to tell, so stick around for that. But before we sort of dive into the run of show and all that, I just want to say thank you all so much for ordering the new graphic novel. Here it is, Where Nightmares Live, our newest graphic novel. So the way it worked, for those of you that don't necessarily know this, is we had an incentive for you all. If there was a certain number of pre-orders on this book, and we filled the gauge up enough, and actually when we throw it, there it is, boom. You see, we actually went above 100%. We were above 100%. And so because we filled it up, here I am doing a sort of thank you live stream here. But so yeah, thank you. You guys are great. You bought up the book. Very cool. I'm honestly quite proud of this. It was a labor of love. I definitely did not do it alone. We have incredible people that are involved in putting these books together. We have Rob Vendetti, who is our primary writer, who basically converts the scripts that I will author with my team and puts it into sort of like graphic novel form. There's nuance to it. And then we have our artist. Here, let's go to the overhead view if you would, James. Our artist, here we go, Andrea Muti. He's a world-renowned comic book artist. You see this here? Look at that beautiful art. And then actually my sister, Evan Allen, she's like the head creative at Ballen Studios, basically. She's the head of writing and publishing. She's brilliant. She played a massive role in putting these graphic novels together. This is an enormous amount of work. There's loads more people beyond that. Thank you to our publisher, Penguin Random House, to 10 Speed Press, our imprint, the whole crew at Ballen Studios. This is really, a lot of people go into it. We're very proud of it. So yeah, we'll talk more about the book as we go. But again, thank you for all the pre-orders, pre-sales. It's why we're doing this Balloween stream. Nobody asked this question, but I'm sure you're thinking it. What's it like to work with your sister at Ballen Studios, making strange, dark, and mysterious content? I gotta say, it's great. It really is. She is absolutely brilliant. She hates when I do this, but she is a two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. She was at the Boston Globe, where she reported. She was an investigative journalist reporting on crime primarily. And she actually, while she was doing her full-time reporting at the Boston Globe, this is years ago, she was like moonlighting and helping me write, along with my mother, who also works at Ballen Studios, Jessie Thuma. Love you, Mom. I know you're listening in the car somewhere out in California, I think. But Evan, she was basically doing this on the side for free, just literally writing, because she's an amazing writer. It just worked out beautifully. She continued to write really well, and I poached her from the Boston Globe, and now she is really the lifeblood in the creative side of the company. She's really in charge of the writer's room. She's instrumental. So I love working with Evan and my mom and the whole gang. It's great. So anyway, how is today going to go? How is this stream going to go? Well, let me just say, before we get into the story and a couple other things, I do have a really cool announcement I'm going to make at the end of the live stream. I'm going to make you wait until the end of the live stream, or you're going to have to wait until it ends and we post it, and then you can fast forward to the end of the live stream and you can watch it that way. But we have a really cool promotion we're doing that's actually going to span the entire country, okay, over the next 2 weeks. And it's going to start tomorrow. We put a lot of thought into this. My right-hand man, Antonio, who I'm sure many of you have come across if you've been to any of the live events. He's the really intense former police officer who's sort of like my head of security, right-hand man. He actually sits in the studio with me when I film all my videos and content. He had this great idea of how we could not just promote the book, but sort of make it a really fun game for all of us to play, okay? And so the way it's going to work is I'm going to tell you about the game at the end of the stream, but the first thing, because I can't give away too much, is going to happen tomorrow, but you got to know what it is and you got to know where to look, okay? It's going to be really good. Let's see, anything else I missed before we get into this? Okay, it is 1:07. I think that's pretty good. Pretty good to get into this thing. So, in the spirit of Halloween, or Balloween, as we're celebrating today, I wanted to choose a story that sort of fit the vibe of Halloween. And I think I got a really good one. This story, it is one that's been covered before, but I promise you it's an oldie. And I went back and I was looking at the script and I was reading some of the notes that I had with the person who is involved in the actual story, because we spoke to this person. And it's just funny looking at the evolution of how I would have approached this story back in 2020 when it was first uploaded. Just sloppy. And so hopefully this live rendition is sort of a better representation of the story. But I think this one it's quite spooky. It's from one person's point of view who experienced this firsthand. It's quite good. So I'm not even going to say the name of the story. We're just gonna get into the story. But again, stick around at the end of the story. Also, we're gonna do some Q&A at the end. After the story, we'll do Q&A. We'll do our cool game announcement. Okay, there's some stuff coming at the end, but you gotta wait till the end. So here we go, story time. All right. In 2010, there was this guy named Nate Smith, who was living in Oregon with his family. And unfortunately, in the fall of 2010, his father, the patriarch of the family, suddenly passed away. And it was sudden. And, you know, the family was one of those families. It was Nate, his mom, and I believe he had a sister. I know he had at least one other sibling. The four of them spent a lot of time together. That was sort of, whenever they were not at work or school, this was a family that spent a lot of time together. And they especially spent a lot of time together outdoors. They were a very outdoorsy family. They liked to fish, they liked to hunt, go hiking. They lived out near Mount Bachelor in Oregon. Mount Bachelor is like this beautiful, I believe there's a ski resort there, but it's picture of huge mountains, snow, pine trees, it's beautiful. And so when this father passed, it sort of immediately created this new, very difficult dynamic. I mean, in addition to there being obviously grief associated and shock associated with his passing, there was also this sudden rupture in the way Nate and his mom and his other siblings sort of lived their day-to-day lives. Suddenly, everything that they did felt different because Dad's not around. And in particular, the family had a cabin out. It was near where they lived. They were sort of just outside of Mount Bachelor. They had a cabin that I believe the father actually built many years ago that was tucked away like up in the foothills of Mount Bachelor. And that small cabin, it was a 2-story cabin, little log cabin. That was a place that the family often went to on the weekend for various trips they would go on. But the dad, he really loved that cabin and he would go there all the time. It was sort of like, you would never be at the cabin unless Dad was there too. So that's like Dad's place. And so the dad passes away. And so you have this really difficult dynamic now, like their whole world has been turned upside down. And also, the dad was the primary breadwinner for the family. And so now that he's gone, there wasn't a way to make ends meet for the family. I mean, he did leave behind some possessions that they'd be able to sell, but for the most part, it was suddenly financially really difficult for the family. And so, given what I just described to you about the difficult dynamic, that sudden gap in their lives, the decision really by the mother in particular, there was a decision made pretty quickly to sell the cabin because it just felt like too difficult to imagine any of them going to the cabin and actually enjoying being there, given that dad, is not there anymore. And so this decision is made. Mom's like, we got to sell the cabin. And Nate, the 17-year-old, his experience with his dad was, he went hunting and fishing with his dad all the time. His dad was like this pseudo survivalist type guy, and he would bring his son out there to that cabin pretty much more than anybody else. It was like the son and the dad went there especially a lot. And the son understood that it makes sense to sell the cabin. He didn't disagree with the decision. However, he just sort of felt like he needed to have closure with this cabin more than his mom or his other sibling. He felt like he needed to go there at least one more time, if nothing else, to just feel close to his dad one last time. And so he asked his mom if it would be okay if he went to the cabin by himself, just spent the weekend out there. He'd bring the family dog, whose name was Midnight. He'd go out there for a weekend, and it would just give him a chance to get that closure. And his mom said, it's a great idea. If that's what you want to do, we will wait to list the property. You can go out. It's yours until we say otherwise. Stay out there for as long as you need to. And then when you come back, we'll move forward with selling the property. So Nate, that weekend, this was sometime in, I believe it was December at this point, he loads up his dad's truck that his dad had willed to him, and he brings Midnight the dog along, and Nate, he packed drinks and snacks. He brought his PlayStation along and some DVDs. Remember when DVDs were a thing? A lot of DVDs. And he took off for the cabin up at Mount Bachelor. And to sort of give you some context of where the cabin was in relationship to civilization, it wasn't so much that this cabin was super isolated and really hard to get to. It wasn't. I mean, there was a main road. It wasn't lots of businesses and houses off of the main road, but there was a main road that led to where there was a side street you would take that would cut up through these tall pine trees, and about a mile into the forest, you'd get to this property. So again, there's a major road that basically brings you there. However, these cabins that were built on Mount Bachelor were spaced really far apart. So there were other cabins, but the closest one was about a mile away. So the neighbors exist, but they're not close enough to really feel like they're actually out there. So once you're at this cabin, it really felt like you were sort of isolated. You're tucked away amongst these huge pine trees, very dense, and there's no neighbors in sight. There's a huge mountain behind you. And so you can go to the main road, go into town, do what you got to do. But as soon as you're in that cabin, it really feels like you're sort of away from the world. And that was actually part of the allure of this cabin. It really felt sort of like peace, tranquil out there. And so Nate, he drives up to the cabin, he turns off the main road, and he makes his way to this cabin. And as he was making his approach along that last stretch before he actually saw his property, it had snowed, not a lot, but there was enough snow on the ground that he was looking out ahead at the road, and he was just gauging if there were other tire tracks on this road he was on. Because before he got to his house, or his cabin, I should say, the road forked in either direction, basically turning into driveways to the other two properties that, again, are a mile away, just about on either side. So this is a mile driveway. It's not really a driveway. These are additional roads. But he's looking to see if there are tracks that would give away whether or not the other neighbors were around. Because it's the winter, this is the time when folks would come out to their cabin and go snowboarding and skiing up on Mount Bachelor and just, be out here. But he didn't really talk to these people. So he's just looking at the road. And there's no sign that anybody has been out here. It's not a guarantee, but it looks like he's likely the only one out here, at least relative to his two closest neighbors, which again are miles away. For him, that was kind of great. He didn't expect to see his neighbors, but he figured the more isolation he could have, the easier it would be to sort of feel in touch with his dad. So he gets to the cabin along with his loyal dog, Midnight, and he parks the truck, he gets out. In front of this cabin, which is a 2-story cabin, there was a clearing basically to park your cars, like a little cul-de-sac in front. That's where they could park their cars. But beyond the front of the house where there was that clearing and obviously beyond the road itself, basically every square inch was taken up with these huge pine trees, very dense forest. So he pulls into the cul-de-sac, he gets out, he takes all his stuff out of his truck, snacks, drinks, PlayStation, the DVDs, his bedding, whatever it is, and he goes inside the cabin. And the layout of the cabin is, it was pretty simple. You walked inside and there was a kitchen and there was a living room that were sort of connected to each other. There was no real wall between them. It was sort of an open floor plan. It's a pretty small cabin. So it's like one big room with windows that looked out onto that cul-de-sac from the kitchen. The kitchen was the most farthest forward room on the first floor. And then there was a second floor that you could access via a stairway in the back of the cabin from the living room that would go up to the second deck, which was a master bedroom. There was one other bedroom, a small bedroom. And the master bedroom sat sort of over the kitchen, so towards the front of the cabin. And from the master bedroom on the second floor, there was these sliding glass doors that looked out over, first of all, there was a balcony, a very small balcony just beyond those sliding glass doors. And then beyond that, you basically are looking out at the drive coming up to the property. You're looking out at that clearing, the cul-de-sac where the cars are, and then out to the forest beyond. So he goes in and gets set up, and he sets up his PlayStation in the living room. And over the next actually 48 hours, Nate had a great time. I mean, he actually expected when he got there to be sort of overcome with grief. He's in the place where everything around him reminds him of his now deceased father. But he found that it was actually really great. He did feel close to his dad. He did feel like this was a really good idea. And he also had the comfort of Midnight, his beautiful black lab. And so he has a really nice couple of days. It's snowing like crazy outside, but each of the days he was there, he was able to shovel out or basically put chains on his tires and get out to town. I'm not exactly sure how he did that, but he got out to town in the first couple of days, got food. He even went snowboarding one of the days. But for the most part, he was just hanging out at the cabin. And most of his time was spent down on the first floor in that living room near the TV. And then he would just obviously sleep upstairs in the master bedroom. But on day 3, he was supposed to be there for, I believe, 4 days, or at least 4 days. But on day 3, when he woke up on day 3, the trip started getting really weird. On day 3, he wakes up, and again, he's had 2 very nice days. And he walks into the kitchen, and he looks out the window to the front of the property, to the cul-de-sac and beyond, and he sees that even though it's been snowing over the last few days, it has snowed a lot over the night. It snowed, feet of snow have come down. And, not alarming. This makes sense for this part of the world, this time of the year. But Nate decided, you know what, I just don't have it in me to battle the weather, to battle the elements and try to go into town or try to go snowboarding. I'm just going to spend the whole day inside, hanging out, playing video games, chilling with my dog, just have a sort of lazy day at the cabin. And he wasn't upset about it. This seemed like a great thing. So he has this little morning routine, and at some point, Midnight, who, for the record, had been acting like a normal dog to this point in the entire trip. Also, for context, Midnight was a really well-trained dog, just was an excellent dog. Was not erratic, was not crazy, did what it was told to do, very loyal. And at some point, on the morning of the 3rd day or mid-morning, Midnight began acting kind of funny, like Midnight needed to go outside. It seemed to Nate like Midnight needed to go outside to pee. And so he just got up out of his chair in the living room and, went outside with Midnight. Now, Midnight's on a leash. They go outside, it's still snowing, there's tons of snow. And Nate sort of expected that Midnight would not run off, because there's so much snow that she would likely just sort of do her business near the door and come back in. But instead, as soon as they stepped outside, Midnight didn't show any interest in wanting to go to the bathroom. Midnight instead was pulling Nate in the direction of basically towards the road that comes in, basically straight out in front of their cabin. It seemed like she was drawn in that direction. And, the snow is not like 6 feet high. It's, a couple feet of snow. He can walk through it, and he's like, okay. And so he lets, Midnight pull him forward past the truck, and he's sort of walking out to where the road is that leads back out to the main road. And it's at that point that Midnight just stops, and she's looking down the road, just staring off into oblivion here. It's broad daylight at this point. And, Nate is like, what's gotten into my dog? There's clearly she's sensed something out here, but he doesn't see any animals out here. The dog has also not reacted like this at all over the past couple of days. And he's come out here many other times with Midnight. And this is just sort of unusual behavior by Midnight. But nonetheless, he's like, come on, just like do your business. Let's go. Like, come on. And eventually Midnight would, sort of break her stare, and she would go to the bathroom. But as Nate is getting ready to pull Midnight back with him and bring her back into the cabin, he looks a little ways down the road, which he had been looking at to this point, but not critically or closely. And he sees what looks like footprints in the snow. And remember, it's been snowing quite a bit. And so if there are footprints, it needs to be relatively recent. Otherwise, they'll be covered up by the snowfall. And, right away, Nate's thinking how weird that is. There is the possibility that if there were footprints up here, one, it could totally be an animal, which would not be strange. There could be deer or moose or whatever else is in Oregon. But it also could be one of his neighbors. There were times in the past where some of these people that lived far away would just go for a walk and sometimes cut through the property line of Nate and the others. That wasn't totally unusual. But just sort of given the fact that he had come in a few days earlier and not seen any sign of anybody being at those other houses, the other cabins, and he had spent the whole day at the cabin, never heard or saw anybody, it just seemed weird that there'd be footprints out here. And so with Midnight, he sort of walks a little bit closer, just farther down towards this road to get a better look. And sure enough, there are footprints. And Midnight, as soon as they start walking in that direction, she began pulling him to go closer and closer. It seemed pretty clear that she was engaging before and now with, these footprints and whatever's out here, whatever's made them. And he gets close enough to where he can, again, clearly see there are footprints. And he sees the stride of these footprints is long enough that it could be a person. It could also be an animal. He doesn't really know. It's too deep to see the actual imprint, to see if it's, a boot or a paw print or a hoof or something. But he's just taking it all in, and he's looking at the footprints, and they sort of come out of the tree line. They haven't come up the road. They come out of the tree line and sort of pace around a little bit, sort of on the road that leads in, and then they turn and they appear to go back into the tree line. Not totally unusual, but it registers for Nate that this is a little bit odd. If that's a person, what are they doing out here? And I didn't see him, and I've been up and moving around the kitchen quite a bit, and based on the snowfall out here, there's a pretty good chance that these prints were made in the last 30 minutes, the last hour. These are recent, and I didn't see anybody. That's just weird. But Nate kind of does what I think most of us would do, which is like, there's probably some reasonable explanation for this. I'm not gonna worry about it. So he takes Midnight, who by this point really wants to go investigate these footprints and whatever's made them, but he drags Midnight back. He brings her back in the house, in the cabin. He goes inside, and now at this point he can't help but feel a little on edge, a little bit like, my privacy's been invaded by someone or something. And so he actually draws the blinds, locks the windows, locks the doors, and he's like, I'm just going to sort of cave it up for the rest of the day. I'm not going to think about what's out there. It's probably just animals or whatever. It's no big deal. So he's back in his cabin, and over the course of the afternoon, again, the windows are all drawn, and he's just sort of enjoying video games. He's sort of forgotten about the footprints. Midnight continued to act really strange. Not all day, not the entire afternoon, but periodically it was like something kept spooking her. And she kept running to the various exits of the cabin, whether it was a door or a window, and she would whimper like she really wanted to look or go outside. And Nate, a couple times he let her out to go to the bathroom, and it seemed like each time she'd be drawn to those footprints, but he wouldn't walk over there. He kind of kept her close to the cabin. But it was like all day, Midnight just could not let go of there's something out there. There's something going on that's piquing her interest. And for Nate, who admits that, he considered himself a pretty tough guy, who was used to being out in the wild by himself. I mean, his mom didn't care at all that this 17-year-old kid is just, go out into the wilderness in Oregon, be out there as long as you want by yourself. It says something about his competency, at least his perceived competency. But he was pretty spooked. He was starting to feel spooked. He just felt like something weird's going on. But, he began to he continued to tell himself that it's no big deal. So that night, they're back in the cabin. Nate makes sure everything is locked, everything is shut, all the blinds are drawn, and he goes upstairs to the bedroom where he sleeps, the master bedroom that has the sliding glass doors that look out to the short balcony that looks out over the courtyard and down to the road below. And he gets in bed, and Midnight pops up on the bed with him, and they lay down, and they are about to go to sleep when Midnight really gets spooked. Like something's going on for Midnight, like more than the whole day. Something really got her attention. And she bolts downstairs to the first floor. And Nate, it's pitch black in their cabin, or close to it. They're in the middle of the woods in Oregon, very isolated. And he can hear his dog just pacing back and forth and whimpering near the door and pawing at the door. She really wants to go outside. And Nate, at this point, he is admittedly scared, and he doesn't want to go outside. He doesn't want to bring her out to pee. He doesn't want to do anything outside. He wants to stay in the house, right? But he still feels like maybe she does need to pee. And so eventually he gets up and he goes downstairs, and sure enough, Midnight is just so stressed. She wants to go outside. He puts her on a leash. He grabs, his cigarettes and his flashlight. He's like, I'm going to just be tough about this. I'm going to go out there, let her pee, come back in. He goes outside, and it's all dark, snow's falling. He's got his flashlight, he's looking around. He doesn't see anything out there, just snow everywhere, trees, snow's falling. And at midnight, doesn't want to pee. She wants to run off into the forest, and he's like holding her back. And finally, he gave up on having her pee because he just felt like she's not out here to do that. She's out here for whatever thing she's sensed out here. And so Nate's like, enough. Comes in the house, and he's like, you know what? If she needs to pee, she can pee in the house. Like, I'm not doing this. I feel unsafe being out there. I'm not doing it. Back in the house, back in the cabin, they lock the doors, they go back to the bed. And so Nate now, he can't sleep. He's just laying in bed. Midnight is like on all fours on the bed, unable to settle down. And as he's laying there trying to convince himself that, everything's okay, he hears something. And it's coming from the roof. He would describe it as what sounded like hooves walking on his roof. And there is no attic in this cabin. The roof is basically right above him. And he hears these 6 distinct steps across the roof, like someone's pacing, or something, some animal, something is pacing across the roof of this cabin. And Midnight instantly is like looking up and growling. Midnight bolts off the bed. She runs over to the sliding doors that lead out to the balcony. She's trying to go out on the balcony. And Nate, he's thinking, how could anything get up there? There isn't a way to get onto the roof. There is no way. There's unless you had a ladder. And he certainly didn't have a ladder out there that led up onto the roof. This makes no sense to him. And he's also thinking, if somehow there was a tree tall enough, let's just say, that overlooked the roof, that maybe an animal leapt out of onto the roof, wouldn't I have heard the impact of it striking the roof? Similarly, if somebody was climbing up a ladder, I would hear the ladder. There's no noise machine going off. There's no fan going off in his room. It's silent. But all he heard were the 6 steps. And then the steps stopped. There was no other sounds. And so at this point, Midnight is over at the sliding doors that lead out to the balcony. And, she's desperate to go out there. And Nate is sort of having this crisis. It's not that late. He has the whole night ahead of him. He feels very on edge, but he sort of feels like, I can't just pretend this is not happening. Like, I'm going to be up all night regardless, but I need to face whatever this is. It's probably just an animal. And, maybe it's an animal that's stuck on the roof and it needs help getting down or something, whatever. But he sort of works himself up that he's like, I need to go out there. I need to go see what's going on. And so he gets up, he puts on his jacket. You know, he has heard no more steps at this point. Midnight's still over at the door. The room is dark. He walks over and he slides open the curtains. And he's looking out, and there's no light out there. There's a small light downstairs that kicks on with motion, but it's not on right now. It's just darkness. He can kind of make out with some moonlight some of the snow coming down, but he knows he's looking out to the front of the property, but it's dark. And then he grabs his flashlight. He's got it in hand, and he's like, all right. He opens up the sliding glass door, and he steps out onto the balcony. And the first thing he does, as soon as he's out there, is he whips around and looks up at the roof behind him, because it's basically right in front of him from the balcony, and he shines his light, and he's looking at the roof, and there's nothing up there. There's no animal, there's no person, there's nothing. And in fact, he can't even see any footprints, which to him was incredibly relieving. He's thinking, I'm scared, I'm making things up. There was never anything. But Midnight, meanwhile, who's right next to him on the balcony, she's now growling. And she's looking out. He can kind of tell she's looking out into the darkness in front of the house. And so Nate takes his flashlight and he goes from looking up on the roof and he begins to wheel the flashlight around. And he begins to scan the tree line, which from his perspective out on this balcony, that the nearest tree line is, 30 or 40 feet away, that tree line. And he's scanning the tree line, and Midnight's looking basically straight out. And so he's making his way until he's going to see whatever she's growling at. And he eventually reaches there's this one big tree that sort of sits almost right in front of the cabin. And it's got this long branch that they call it the sitting tree, because it almost looks like there's a seat on this huge branch that's like 20 feet off the ground. And his flashlight reaches the sitting tree and he stops, because illuminated by his flashlight is this man who's crouched, almost perched on this branch. And he's got these long arms and he's gripping a branch above him. He looks like he's not wearing any clothes. He's barefoot, and his mouth is wide open, and he's staring directly at Nate. And Nate, for a second, can't even process what he's seeing, but then he's suddenly so scared, his instinct is to grab Midnight, jump back inside of his house, shut the sliding doors, shut the curtains. And so he's just locked himself inside of his cabin. But as soon as he did that, he's like, oh my God, there's someone out there. I need to know what they're doing. Are they going to come try to attack me or something? And so it's only been a couple of seconds now. And from now, inside the cabin, the glass doors are shut. He opens up the blinds, does not open the door. He opens the blinds. Now he's got glass windows and he's looking out, and he raises his flashlight and he presses it to the glass and he shines it on the sitting tree, and there's nobody there now. And he looks all around and there's no one. It's just darkness. It's a dark forest. No one's out there. And so now Nate does not know what to make of this, because he's heard footsteps on the roof, impossible footsteps. He saw the footsteps yesterday that didn't really make any sense. His dog's been acting funny. This guy, whatever this is, he described it as being so tall, long, skinny, tall, gray-looking figure, clearly is out here, or I'm losing my mind. And so his decision was, I'm just going to stay awake all night, be vigilant, and wait this thing out. And tomorrow morning, as soon as the sun comes up, I'm out of here. And so he did a pass all through his house to ensure all the doors are locked, all the windows are locked, drew all the curtains, and then he and Midnight hopped on the bed in the master bedroom and just prepared to wait, because at this point, he doesn't feel like it's safe to go to sleep. And so he's sitting in bed. Midnight is totally on edge, but she's gone from being angry, like wanting to attack, to now being a little bit scared herself. And she's tucking up against Nate on the bed. And after about 30 minutes, something downstairs gets Midnight's attention. Midnight leaps off the bed, but instead of running down the stairs, she runs to the top of the stairs. And now she's basically looking down to the first floor. Nate's on the bed. He's looking over at Midnight. And then Nate hears a tapping sound on his front door downstairs, almost like someone's tapping the door with their finger over and over again. And then it stops. And then Midnight sprints downstairs. And for a minute, Nate's like, what do I do? I mean, is that guy down there now? I have no idea what to do in this situation, so he just waits. And Midnight, she's pacing around, and eventually she calms down, and she comes back upstairs. There's no more tapping. And so Nate, his heart's racing. He's thinking, like, is this the same guy? What is this thing? Who is this thing? Who is this? A minute later, he hears more tapping, but now it's not coming from the first floor front door. It's coming from the side. He had a bathroom just off the master bedroom, and there's a little sliver of glass that looks into the bathroom. And he can distinctly hear, even though he didn't hear any sounds of someone climbing the exterior of their cabin, which would be required to get to this, something is tapping on the small pane of glass, looking into the window right behind him. Nate's horrified. The tapping goes on for a bit. Midnight at this point is spooked. She's tucked up against him. She's just looking into the bathroom. The tapping stops. Then there's more tapping on the other side of the cabin. And for about an hour or so, this is how it went all around the house. Just periodic tapping, all the different windows, the doors, the walls. There was no sound leading up to the tapping. It would just start somewhere around the cabin. It was absolutely terrifying. And then at a certain point, somewhere around 2, 3 in the morning, he heard the sound of footsteps out on the balcony. And then the tapping began on the glass of the sliding glass doors, 6, 10 feet away from him and midnight. And all night, for the rest of the night, just sporadic tapping on that door. Until finally, the sun came up and the tapping stopped. And at that point, Nate is desperate to get out of here. He's so scared. But the sun is up now, the blinds are all drawn. He hasn't heard tapping in some time. And he goes over and he opens up the blinds and he looks out onto the balcony. And there's all these hoof prints all over the front balcony. And he steps out onto the balcony and he looks down, and it's an unbelievable sea of hoof prints all around the house. There's a racetrack around the house. He turns, looks onto his roof. There's all sorts of hoof prints on his roof. They are everywhere. And so Nate grabs his dog, grabs his stuff, jumps in his car, speeds home, and could not have been happier that they sold that place within the next month or so, because he was never going to go back. And he has no idea what it was. So that's the story. I think it's called Who Was Knocking? So there you go. What do you think? What do you think of that? That was a pretty good rendition. All righty. Well, unfortunately, the chat is sort of delayed, so I can't really get your live reactions. Let's see. It was Santa and his reindeer. Yeah, probably. Probably. I don't know what to make of stories like that, because I think that in a situation where you're out in the woods by yourself, even if you're like a survivalist or something, I think it'd be easy to work yourself up and get scared. However, how do you make sense of all the hoof prints around the house? I don't know. Pretty good. So on that note, remember we have a cool thing coming out here. Stick around for the big announcement, okay? But I think now is a good time to reference that this graphic novel, while it does not necessarily include that particular story, it does have 9 stories in it. It's an anthology of stories that are sort of along the same lines, beautifully brought to life with illustrations by Andrea Muti, okay? And I want to tell you that actually right now, why don't we do this right now? Throw the graphic up you can still get yourself a signed copy of Where Nightmares Live. If you go to book.ballenstudios.com, you're going to land on this page here at Premier Collectibles and Books A Million. You can get yourself a signed bookplate copy by yours truly. Pretty cool, okay? And actually, if you go to the next graphic here on that same website, book.ballenstudios.com, if you scroll down, those are the other places you can purchase said book, Where Nightmares Live. Those are not of the signed variety. So if you want to do that, you should. It's pretty good. If you like that story, we got 9 more in the same vein. And while we're on the topic of selling things, get yourself a seasonal official MrBallen flannel. There it is. If you go to shopmrballen.com, thanks for putting the sign out there so I remember the URL. Shopmrballen.com, get yourself one of these sweet flannels. 20% off. What a deal. Shopmrballen.com, get yourself a flannel. So, what we're going to do is we have a little bit of time. Don't worry if you're sticking around for the big announcement, it's coming. But first, we're going to do a little Q&A. So why don't you all fire off your questions in the chat? I'll do my best to read them. It kind of flies through. But while you all populate some questions in the chat, I'm going to take a few questions from our Discord server. Shout out to all the members of our Discord server. If you don't know what that is, well, it's pretty cool. We have this server with like over 100,000 people in it. It's free to join. It's like a big internet hangout spot. It's like the town square for the strange, dark, and mysterious. I'm pretty sure there are links in my bio. It's free to join. I think you can probably just Google like Discord MrBallen. It'll bring you to it. But anyways, these are some questions from Discord, and then I'm going to grab some from here as well. First question. If your life was ever turned into a movie, who would you want to play you? You know what's funny? I don't even know why I just thought of this. I haven't read these questions yet. This is off the cuff, so this is not a staged answer. I don't know if you guys are big fans of Daniel Tosh, the comedian, or not. He shares no likeness with me. We are in no way similar. But I think he's hilarious, and he would not, I don't think he'd do a good job representing me, but he'd be really funny. He's like my favorite celebrity. He also notoriously doesn't do like any public appearances. He doesn't interact with anybody. He's like really private. And I think it'd be cool to have Daniel Tosh play me. Are you coming to the UK? From Trill1701. I think eventually, yeah. So this year, unfortunately, we could not swing a live tour, which frankly was crushing. But we will definitely do more live events, not just live streams, but live in-person events. It was really, really cool doing that last year. We went on, actually, real quick, who went to one of the 15 live shows in 2024? That was a good time. Let us know in the chat. Or the one in 2023 in Austin. There was another one we did. But I think that eventually we could go to the UK, for sure. Do some storytelling. I love doing the live stuff. Here's a question. Do you sleepwalk every night? Not every night, but pretty close. There's I believe I have a combination of nightmare syndrome that I've had since before the military. So it's not like I did Town Hall in New York City. Nice. Some folks were at, you were at the one in Charlotte. Very nice. Crystal Capone 2243. Nightmare syndrome is exactly what it sounds like. You literally just have these visceral, awful nightmares. I started having like sleepwalking episodes when I was 18 in college. My first one, I guess now I think the statute of limitations has passed, so I won't get in trouble. But when I was in college, my first semester in college, I think it was that while it was, I think it was my first semester in college. I was at UMass Amherst. Anybody attend the University of Massachusetts in beautiful Amherst, Mass? UMass Amherst. I was asleep in my dorm in the John Quincy Adams dorm. It's like this huge high-rise dorm. It's like 24 stories. I went to bed and I suddenly woke up, and I have this weird. If you've not sleepwalked, it's hard to put this in perspective. But basically, when you're sleepwalking, you're sort of aware that something's not quite right. Like, you're not quite normal, but you can't help but feel all the fear or anxiety that's associated with whatever dream or experience you're having in your sort of dreaming state. You're sort of really caught between reality and dreams. And so I have this moment where I'm sort of vaguely aware that I'm standing in the hallway of my dorm on the 20th or 19th floor or something. And I also look down at my hand, and I notice that it's sort of bloodied, like I punched something. At least that's what it looks like. And I also glance up and I notice that there's there's a fire alarm that's right in front of me on the wall. And there's there's a plastic cover, that's designed to sort of be there so you don't accidentally pull it. You lift it up and pull the fire alarm, and it's been broken. It looks like it's been impacted by something. And I'm sort of putting together that this doesn't feel right. Like maybe I did this. And then I sort of take stock of the fact that the alarm's going off in the dorm. And so I run to the stairwell, and there's all these people evacuating. No one's panicked. It's college kids. And I we walk down like 19 floors of stairs, and then I go outside and it's raining, and everybody basically congregated in the like right outside the front doors because it was raining. But I like walked outside, and I don't even know, I don't know, I must have been sleepwalking. And I like wandered away from the group and slowly came to realize I was only wearing shorts. And it's like cold, it's raining, I'm just wearing shorts. And I walked to this puddle, and I'm like looking at my hand, and I'm standing in this puddle. It's like ankle deep, and I'm like dipping my knuckle in the water for a while until it sort of like dawned on me that I was sort of sleepwalking. And then I ran back to the group and pretended I was acting normally. But I don't have proof of this, but I'm reasonably certain I pulled that fire alarm in my sleepwalking state. But that was in 2018. That was not 2018. Oh my God, that was in 2006. So, but anyhow, do I sleepwalk every night? No, but nightmare syndrome is a thing. You basically have nightmares. And then I have this thing that I believe I have. I've done sleep studies. No one can quite pin it down. It's called non-REM. Oh, what the heck is it called? Disturbance something or other. Basically, when I'm not in REM, I basically stay in deep sleep so long, and then I like have a hard time coming out of it. Anyways, I'm just a mess. So a lot of times I sleepwalk. A lot of times. I slept walk once. It's unreal. From Nickel Nixon 7310. It's weird. A lot of my sleepwalking is me leaping out of my bed and running as fast. I sleep alone because of this, because I'm a horrible sleep partner. Shout out to my wife, Amanda, who puts up with it, or she did for the first decade of our marriage. Now I sleep alone. I run out of the room screaming profanities, usually at the absolute top of my lungs, because I believe someone's going to kill me. And then I sort of like come to, my wife's like, go to bed. Lovingly, she says that. So yeah. All right, I told you guys to put questions in here, and I've done a horror. What happened to your neck? From Chickswin. Chicks, WNN. What happened to your neck? Here, let's do this. And this is, I'm not insulting you, Chickswin, but I've tried so hard to cover this. Would someone, or would you all like to put in the comments what's wrong with my neck? Let's see how many people have taken the many times I've tried to address it. Basically, I do an exercise in the gym that cuts it, and I keep doing the exercise because you got to keep going. You got to stay disciplined. And I cut my collarbone every single time. Kiara, Keara, K.E.A.R.A. What's my go-to coffee order? Honestly, I just do black, venti, no ice, but iced coffee from Starbucks. So iced, black, no ice from Starbucks. And you know what I actually do? I buy them sort of in bulk. I get 6 coffees like that, and I put them in my fridge. And then every day, I get a nice, fresh, iced black coffee. All right, let's see. A couple more questions. We got plenty of time. Kathleen Neese, 1217. What's your favorite horror movie? So me and my children, I don't know if this is age appropriate or not for my kids, but we watched Signs recently by Mel Gibson. That scared the heck out of me when I was a kid. Honestly, it was just that scene with the alien walking past the alleyway at the kid's birthday party. Horrifying. And also Joaquin Phoenix is such a good actor. It's just, I'll watch him in anything. So we watched that. That's one of my favorites. And we watched Paranormal Activity 1 and Paranormal Activity 2. Those are great films too. I think the first one was better though, because it sort of set the genre in motion, sort of. Although that really set the genre. I think Blair Witch Project did the found footage thing first. But I'd say Signs. I don't know if it counts as horror, but I'd say Signs. That's probably it. Navy Aviator just said, I'd be willing to argue that by the 6th cup of coffee I've put in the fridge that it's no longer fresh. I disagree, because I drink too much coffee and I fly through them. So it's like within a couple of days, I'm hitting number 6. Grant Kelly, 7490. Are you sober? I am. I am sober as of May 5th, 2024. I've always struggled with substance abuse, namely alcohol. But the way I would struggle with it is I would convince myself I had no issues with it and have periods of my life where I would ruthlessly binge drink by myself, often at night. I would like hide. My go-to actually became, well, I'm not advocating for this in the least, but it was like those seltzers, those hard seltzers, because they didn't give me a hangover and I could drink them really fast. And I would like sneak into my garage at night and like drink six or 8 or 10 as fast as I could, and then like go to bed. I don't even know why I did that, but it became like I had to do it. And then my wife would catch me, and then I would tell her, "Oh my God, I'll never do it again." And I would do it again. And I genuinely, it wasn't like I'm a bad person. I just couldn't not do it. I would go through months. At one point, I did a whole year where I didn't touch anything, but I would always just fall back into it because I'd have like a good run in my life. I'd be like hitting all my responsibilities and like just being like good in every way that I deemed good. And I'm gonna reward myself. I'm gonna get drunk by myself in my garage with when all the kids and my wife is asleep. It's a bad setup. Doesn't really. Oh man, it was awful. It got so bad that in May of 2024. I did sort of feel like if I didn't clean up my act, one, the health issues for me would be pretty real. Also, trivia, if you look at some of the older videos of mine on YouTube, I gotta say, I'm hungover in a lot of those videos. So it was just taking over my life. But I felt like it was gonna ruin my marriage to Amanda. You know, we got married in 2011. We got 3 kids together, but you know, it was like 6 times or something that I got so bad, and then she caught me after I promised I wouldn't do it again. It's that cycle of lying. Even though my intentions were good, the lying is just, it's tough on a marriage when it feels like you don't have trust. Even though I really believe that addiction is like a disease, and at a certain point, I wasn't choosing to harm my wife. I was just doing the thing I was addicted to, which was like binge drinking alcohol more than anything else. So I have stopped. I got to be honest. I did do AA for a time. I did it in Texas for a little while. I did it in Jersey as well. And then I did it. And so I'm laughing because I probably should have kept it up, but I ended up not doing it anymore. I don't know. I didn't really work great for me. I felt like I just felt ready to stop, I suppose. And also it was just eating up a lot of my time to go to the meetings. I know that sounds horrible, but in the spirit of transparency, that's sort of the reality. But now, like, I look at this platform I have as like a place where I'm being held accountable every day, because I made it a thing that I'm sober. And I don't judge in the least anybody who's not sober, but I'll tell you, if you have an issue, and you probably know you do, sobriety, it sucks at first, but you quickly realize that the things that you would, when you're in the middle of abusing substances, you view things like sitting on the couch and watching a show like with your kids, it would be kind of boring. I hate to say that, but it's true. But when you remove the substances and it's out of your system, you actually, the way you react to things totally changes. You start getting like dopamine rushes from things that are ordinary and like good. Like hanging with your kids suddenly is honest to God enjoyable, and like you want to do it, you want to be there, you want to be present. It applies to everything. Like it reshuffles the way you are made happy. And then once you're there, it's easy to maintain it. It's just hard to get there, of course. So shout out to those struggling with that. I know it's hard. It took me years and years and years. I think this is the final time. I believe it is. So, all right, let's see. We have a few minutes left. I'll do one more question. I'll take one from Discord, so you can stop pummeling the chat with questions. Number 14 was, it's after all the stories you've researched over the years, have they had any effect on your beliefs? I wish I knew who asked that question. So if you asked that question, it's a great question. The truth is, I've always been really open and interested in the strange, dark, and mysterious. This channel certainly did not come to be because I was like, I'm going to make a YouTube channel. It was a byproduct of already being really genuinely interested in this genre. I find the world's mysteries to be fascinating, like especially like kind of scary stuff. But so the reason I say that is I think I was more tempted to believe things at the beginning of doing MrBallen. Like this started really in earnest in 2020. Now, as a result of having researched and read through and just read so much and researched so much, you realize that there really aren't a huge number of like highly credible, not paranormal, but like weird happenings. There definitely are those that have happened. We tell as many as we can on the channel and on the podcast, but there's so many stories that are fabricated online, maybe with good intentions, maybe with not. And I think that having a keen eye for not wanting to believe. Now, with that said, there's like a gray area, and we'll often sort of live in this gray area, which is you get somebody's point of view. Like you speak to somebody like Nate, that's not really his name, but you know, when I spoke to him, like that was his perspective. That's what he saw. That's what he experienced. Whether or not it happened exactly the way he recalls, or whether or not my rendition holds up to what he actually saw, is secondary to the fact that in his life, he had an experience that was like that. That's what it was. It could have been something that was totally benign, but we don't have that information. All we have is his testimony. And so if you take it as a story and you take it as that's what he thinks he saw and felt and witnessed, then that's what it is. And it's great. But if you start getting into like, what do I believe in, like in terms of paranormal or in terms of this, I think I'm much more skeptical as a result of all the research, but still very open-minded. There was a channel that I used to love that's called, and they actually might still be around. I think they changed a lot, but it's called Dark 5, the number 5. There's no audio. It's just this creator would find the craziest like world mysteries. You should still check them out. I hope they're still on there. And they just would have a couple of sentences they would put on the screen. They'd like play the video. The video is like 3 minutes long. And it would be like a slideshow of these fascinating images, these horrifying images with like little bullets that sort of gave context to the pictures. And I would go down these crazy rabbit holes, and I thought they were so cool. I'll say Dark 5, and I'm just promoting them because I think they're great. They will talk about stuff that is, in my mind, a lot of it's pretty credible. So if there was a place that you wanted to go and I'm not giving an endorsement to all their content, but a lot of the stuff they cover on Dark 5, it's like, look into it yourself. There's some validity to it. Rob Gavigan, yeah, I love that guy. He was one of my favorite channels. Mr. Nightmare, love Mr. Nightmare. Anyhow, okay, so here we go. We're gonna go to the big announcement that you've all patiently waited for. So again, this is shout out to Antonio who came up with this brilliant plan here. So what we're gonna do is over the next 2 weeks, this is gonna be starting tomorrow. And for those that don't know, if you just joined late, I said there was gonna be a game that we're gonna announce here that's gonna play out over the next 2 weeks. Here's the game. We are going to be hiding copies of the new graphic novel, Where Nightmares Live, that will have a special customized inscription and signature from me on the book. You'll definitely know if you found one of the hidden books. We're gonna hide them all over the country. We're gonna hide one a day starting tomorrow. So on Halloween, that's the first book that's gonna get hidden. And the way it's gonna go is over the next 2 weeks, every day at 2 p.m. Eastern, give or take, we're going to drop a clue as to where that day's book has been hidden. They are not all going to be hid in bookstores. Some will, but some will be hid in, appropriate, spooky places. Nothing that's unsafe. Don't worry, kids. I think it's safe to say kids can take part in this. This will not be dangerous, other than maybe you need to go into some spooky graveyard or something. But each day, keep in mind, we only will know if you found it if you document it. So we're basically hoping that with each person who finds a book, we did this the last couple of days we were doing this, and people did respond this way. Take a picture of the inscription, because it's a unique inscription inside the book. Also, the book is yours to take, of course. You don't have to do anything. It's yours to take. Take a picture. You don't got to be in the picture. If you want to take a video, if you want to be in, great. Send it to me or tag me, but in some way, get it to the MrBallen Instagram account. We are on the lookout for these videos and pictures, and then I will interact with you, congratulate you, and make you feel great about your big find, talk to you a little bit, and we'll put you on social media. So it's going to be a scavenger hunt every day for the next 2 weeks, starting tomorrow. Is a clue coming out today, though?
No, announcing it today. Clue tomorrow.
The first clue is tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern, and then every subsequent day, 2 p.m. Eastern, about that day's hidden book. When the clue goes out at 2, the book will already be in place. So you just sit there, and if you're lucky enough that the clue tells you that something's near you, go out and get it. It's going to be worth it. I wish you happy hunting. Again, before we close this thing down, Where Nightmares Live, there are still signed copies. I'm going to throw that graphic back up on the screen here. At Premier Collectibles and Books A Million, you can go to book.ballenstudios.com. It'll bring you there. There's the other places you can get the book. Those are not signed copies, though. We also have this nifty flannel. If you want to go back to me here, the yellow MrBallen flannel. There you go. Boom, 20% off. Go to shopmrballen.com. This thing's sweet. 20% off. Miss anything? I think that's it. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate you guys sticking around. That's going to do it. Happy Balloween. Happy Halloween. Again, clues, 2 p.m. Eastern on my social media, Instagram. Tomorrow is the first clue at 2. Tomorrow is the first hidden book. That's going to do it. Thank you all so much. Happy Halloween.